Welcome, everyone, to episode number 6, also known as Gun Control Part 3. Our break for barbecue was so long, it lasted a week.
It was a good barbecue.
It was an excellent barbecue. We were very stuffed and very food drunk afterwards. So, you know.
Yeah.
With me today, again, as always, my co-hosts, Paddy and Trent, who are still members of the Rager Regiment, evidently.
Hell yeah. Hoorah.
Yeah, fifth, or is it first 21st Wolfhound? I don't know what that was from, but that became
I think it was just made up.
That was a running joke for, I think, about a decade.
Yes. Yeah. Wasn't that funny, though? But anyway.
I loved it.
So.
Never got old for me.
Carrying on, we were wanting to talk about third and fourth order effects of gun control, at least as it pertains to our milieu in Canada. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess Paddy, why don't you start us off with your tinfoil hattedness?
Okay.
And away we go.
Yeah, and it's just to give the background. We talked about what we thought would be the short-term effects, like say within the first 5 years. We talked about what we'd see in the next, say, 5 to 10 years of a gun prohibition. We talked about some of the more philosophical aspects, like, again, and I think it's important to think about what happens when we start to define what we may do and what we may not do on the idea of need. In other words, well, you can't buy that house because you can't convince a government bureaucrat you need that house. You can't buy that vehicle or you can't buy a vehicle at all because you haven't convinced a government bureaucrat you need that vehicle, which is the door we open when we allow gun control on the basis that, well, nobody needs a gun. Let's let that percolate for a little bit. I want to talk about what Trent has called my tin hat or tinfoil hat.
I didn't. Hey, I have not once used the tinfoil hat reference towards you. That's
Well, I think
Steve,
it's fair. I think it's fair
but I've laughed and responded.
because I think, when I usually talk about this, that is a common response. Like, oh, come on, man, it's paranoid. Hear me out here. I'm going to give you a quote from The Guardian from February 10th, talking about the trucker protest in Ottawa. Quote, officers have also warned that some protesters are believed to have firearms. We've been worried about how tooled up these guys are, said a source who has been part of the city's emergency response. This comes from, again, The Guardian in the UK on 11 February. Here's a quote from news.yahoo.com. It was also reported by France 24 on the 3rd of February, and Reuters on the 2nd of February by David Youngren and Ismail Shakil. Quote, police in Ottawa see signs that guns have been brought into a truckers' protest against vaccine mandates that has paralyzed the Canadian capital, the police chief said on Wednesday, adding that calling in the military would pose major risks. We have had an indication around firearms coming into this jurisdiction as part of this demonstration as much as a week and a half ago, Chief Peter slowly told a briefing, end quote. Now again, it's useful to remember that at the time, there were howls of protest from certain figures on the government side demanding that action be taken in regards to crushing these protests. There was, if you'll bear with me, as unfortunately my desktop only allows me to pull up one item at a time here. 8 out of 10 Liberal voters at the time of the protests wanted violence, or thought violence was acceptable to close down those protests. 6 out of 10 NDP supporters. This was part of an Ipsos push-poll for Global TV.
Those are two interesting numbers right there by comparison.
Yes. And it's also interesting when you contrast that how all in for Wet'suwet'en pipeline protesters exactly 1 year prior to the Freedom Convoy protests. Like the exact contrast. Same time of year. The Wet'suwet'en pipeline protest went on for 3 months, did involve violence, did involve destruction of property. Yet there was infinite patience and restraint on behalf of the government. Jagmeet Singh called the Freedom Convoy an attempt to overthrow the government and that they were white supremacists. 77 and 75% of NDP supporters and Liberal supporters saw little to nothing in common, according to an Abacus poll, with the Freedom Convoy or the trucker protesters. And there was a viral YouTube video that went out. I know for certain you saw it. It was of a Zoom meeting or virtual meeting with the police commission in Ottawa, where members of the Ottawa City Council were really, really angry with the police that they were not moving in there and forcibly shutting this protest down. And the police were saying, well, it's not that easy. So I'm going to give you another quote on that. This one from CBC, February 14th. Quote, Mounties said in a release early Monday that they became aware of a small organized group within the larger protest at Coots, which led to 11 arrests. They say they had information that the group had access to a cache of firearms and ammunition in 3 trailers. Officers seized long guns, handguns, multiple sets of body armor, a machete, a large quantity of ammunition, and high-capacity firearm magazines. Police say a small organized group within the protest was said to have a willingness to use force against the police if any attempts were made to disrupt the blockade. End quote. And I'm going to give you one more from 15 February from CNN. Quote, the Royal Canadian Military Police said Monday it had seized 13 long guns, handguns, multiple sets of body armor, a machete, and a large quantity of ammunition, high-capacity magazines connected to a small organized group within a larger protest at the U.S. border crossing in Coots. It basically repeated the same, I'll stop the quote there. It basically repeated the same story that there was, the police had a belief that there was the potential of firearms within the protesters. Now, with that, we all know how this protest ended. We know that it ended with a serious abrogation of civil rights by a massive crackdown, a use of violence that was initiated by the government. To sum it all up, I'm going to quote Tom Bartlett, speaking on druthers.net May 21, 2022. He says, protesting is now illegal. When government determines what protests are or not allowed, just like determining what constitutes free speech or approved opinion, then we know these rights no longer exist. Anyone authorized to protest are not really protesters, but state actors helping to push the Overton window in the direction of the ruling party. As an aside, let's insert the wet sweating protesters there. Bartlett continues. Our media, government, justice system, and law enforcement agencies have been so deeply infiltrated that a fascist state is entirely possible. In Christian terms, we have seen a separation of the wheat from the chaff. The violation of basic rights has been made illegal with no legal justification, but via enforcement by all these institutions. We need no longer ask how Stalin, Hitler, Mao, or any number of oligarchs managed to inflict egregious evils on a substantial segment of civil society, end quote. I am going to put it to you guys that the freedom of association, the freedom of conscience, the free speech, all of these civil liberties that we had taken for granted prior to 2019 that were in action at the trucker protest and then were snuffed out at that same protest are only in effect. That protest was only allowed to go on as long as it did because the authorities in Ottawa believed that if they went in and tried to kill protesters, those protesters might kill them back. It was only the possibility of firearms that preserved the civil rights of those protesters. That the second the cops and the civic government and the federal government knew these people were defenseless, they went in with a heavy, heavy hand. Start running people down with horses, start smashing skulls with steel batons, mace, tear gas, the whole 9 yards. That it is not courts, it is not lawyers, it is not documents on beautiful pieces of parchment that protect our civil liberties. It is the ability of the people themselves to vouchsafe those civil liberties. Is this not exactly what the United States Second Amendment is for? Do you need a better demonstration of what happens when an authoritarian government perceives it has a free hand? It's all yours, Trent.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack here.
I'm not going anywhere.
There's a lot of dots to connect that I don't believe need connecting here.
Okay. Go on.
And some of them are individually not relevant to each other and not necessarily interpretable solely in the view you've got.
Okay.
You've presented to me.
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned, in my opinion.
Okay.
When the police finally went in, to my mind, my understanding is not that they went in because, or even held off because, simply because of firearms. Certainly not from the point of view, well, if we go in to kill them, they're going to kill us back. It's if we go in to do our jobs as it's being expected of us.
I admit I was being provocative in that.
Right.
And yes, you could accuse me of reductio ad absurdum or a reductum ad absurdo. But I did want to make that point.
Yeah.
That, to be more accurately said, the police had to be very careful in the application of violence because they were aware of the possibility that the protesters might defend themselves.
Yeah,
that they would not be helpless.
Absolutely. So, I mean, to me, this is them expressing the difficulties of doing their jobs, especially as it was being expected of them by the powers that be. The people that were trying to hold them accountable. Why aren't you doing something about this? And they're saying, well, it's more complex than that.
Yeah.
I think, frankly...
Our members don't want to get shot.
Well, it's not just that. There's a lot going on.
Well, that's what it comes down to.
Okay, so as the representative, so-called, of the woke left around this table here, I would argue that perhaps this, and I'm going to be facetious here, but this could be an example of whitewashing, the white police not wanting to go in against white protesters.
Do you think that was actually at play?
No, but I'm taking things to the absurd level that I feel that.
Well,
you may be.
Let me give you something that's also some more absurdity from charlatan.ca, a pretty progressive publication, published on the 18th of March. This is regarding testimony from the Journalism Under Siege panel, which was a media conference about digesting the lessons learned for legacy media in coverage of the protest. Judy Trent is an investigative journalist for CBC News who started her coverage of the trucker protest by looking at the military and police connections. Quote, I wanted people to understand that part of it wasn't just fun, she said. Let me reread that. Quote, I wanted people to understand that part of it, that it wasn't just fun, Trent said. That it was individuals who had these paramilitary skills, who could use it to entrench within the city, who perhaps had access to firearms. End quote. Trent said she discovered several protesters who were members of JTF-2, a Canadian Special Operations Forces unit, although she did not know why they were there. She added there were at least 10 active soldiers who were, quote, sympathetic to the cause, end quote, potentially possessing firearms. Trent continues, this was a real threat. This wasn't just people protesting peacefully, end quote. These are Trent's words, not any official body. Justin Ling, a freelance and notable CBC journalist. Justin Ling, a freelance investigative journalist, agreed with Trent. Ling specializes in covering extremist groups, and from this experience, he said he understood the convoy had, quote, nothing to do with anti-vax groups, end quote. Instead, he said the convoy supporters were from extremist and conspiracy groups. Dun, dun, dun. This is the part I love. Ling summarizes by saying, these people don't believe the media, he said, And that's what makes them dangerous. End quote. Let that marinate, Steve. They don't believe the media, and so they're dangerous. But
Is that saying the quiet part out loud?
but beyond that, I don't think it's crazy to say that there was a restraint imposed upon the authorities by the potential, by the what they considered to be a very, very real possibility that the protesters would defend themselves, that they had lost the monopoly of violence, and that once they believed that monopoly was reestablished, they went in with a free hand and had no compunction whatsoever to destroy their civil rights.
I disagree.
Well, then
almost
why?
entirely.
Why?
This won't be the first example where authorities, the police, who are meant to enforce order, have had to look at a situation and go, okay, we need to temper ourselves, pace ourselves, assess the situation, come up with, find the solutions, negotiate.
Okay.
Right? The carrot and stick, the negotiator versus the SWAT team, right?
Right.
Same thing here. They're looking at the situation, they're realizing that if they do this wrong, it's going to get ugly, right? And not just because, people are going to shoot at them. It's because, they are taking rights into consideration. They are taking numbers into consideration. They are taking...
How were they taking rights into consideration?
Because...
Given in retrospect, how they completely disregarded those civil rights. And considering how from 2019 onwards, through the COVID epidemic, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is worthless. Like, we know for a fact now from hard experience through the lockdowns that it is it's a myth. It doesn't exist.
I disagree wholeheartedly.
How can you possibly do that? How can you possibly think you still have civil rights after your lived experience of the last 3 years?
Well,
freedom of association, gone. Freedom of movement, gone. Freedom of conscience, gone. All of these things, and they have failed all of their court challenges.
It's interesting how you bring up freedom of conscience, right? So here's my freedom of conscience, right? And my conscience.
Okay.
And it ties in with the concept of rights and responsibilities.
Okay.
Right? And then this is what's been playing out. I've heard a lot of raging about rights from the right.
Yeah.
Okay. What I haven't heard a lot about is responsibilities. Like, none.
Okay.
Right? And that's why I feel like the trucker protest in Ottawa, and I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole because I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush.
Okay.
All right? But there were elements of it that were simply, I think as a whole, they were obnoxious.
Okay.
Right?
Fair.
But there were elements within it that were beyond obnoxious. They were ignorant. They were vile.
Okay.
And they were just very nasty
to
certain segments.
So that means
of the
they
Ottawa
shouldn't
population.
have civil rights?
No, I'm not saying that. All right?
Because that's what it sounds like.
That's not where we're taking this conversation right now.
Okay.
I'm using that as the example, all right?
Okay.
But my sympathy for the whole sympathy for the protest, irrespective of their rights, my sympathy for them is very low, right?
Okay.
But getting back to the concept,
I don't see the relevance.
Getting back to the concept of
responsibilities
conscience
versus rights.
and responsibility.
Okay.
I saw it, and I saw this very early on.
Okay.
This is something that our society has not gone through in 100 years. So that's 4 generations.
Okay.
At the same time, we're a very different society from what we were 100 years ago, right? So there's that added challenge, right? We're talking about a global epidemic. What are we supposed to do about this, right? And here, my sense is the same people on the right that are freaking out about their rights, on the one hand, right? If the government had done nothing, they'd just be, fucking Trudeau and fucking Notley and and just whoever.
Speculation.
Not doing it. You're right. You're absolutely right. It's hard to prove a negative.
We can't prove the negative.
It always
Yeah,
is.
that's right.
Right? But that's my sense of it. Something had to be done. And I looked at this situation and I processed what was coming in terms of information and data. Mm-hmm. And I looked at the threat and I thought, you know what? I don't think it's unreasonable for me. I'm not even talking about someone asking me to do this. I'm talking about me saying to myself, it is not unreasonable for me to limit my interaction with my fellow citizens, and not just from my own sense of well-being to take care of myself, but to prevent transmission of this at all, right? Let alone directly to people and thus to other people.
Okay, so does that qualify you to impose that decision on other people?
There you hit the nub of the problem, right? But that's where I talk about rights and responsibilities. When we talk about the difference between Americans and Canadians in a lot of ways, we talk about life, liberty,
and the pursuit of happiness, versus peace, order, and good government.
And I think there is a social personality that goes with that, right? I've lamented in the last 10 years or so. Actually, it was 10 years this year that I went down to Texas, and I got a bit of a rude awakening in terms of what politeness actually is and how we feel that Canadians are polite. I think the Canadian politeness has really gone downhill, right? But my sense has been, up until a decade ago, that we have kind of what the Western Europeans have to an extent, in terms of the social contract we have with each other as co-citizens, right? Do I have that right to impose it?
Yeah. Do you have... should you have the power to impose your morality upon others? Not even can. No. Let's go to the second subjunctive. Should you have that power?
I guess it comes down to, for me, it's the concept of free will, right?
Okay.
For me, my approach to free will, because I'm not particularly religious.
Okay.
Right? And I've lamented this too, or I've noted this, right? That as we become a more secular society, there's been this moral and ethical vacuum.
Yes.
Right? That
as we have moved away from religion, we haven't found something to replace the functional role of religion. So
I'm individualistic to the extent that everyone has the right to choose for themselves. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm going to use the word should here, right? Or it is proper in my eyes that one takes a view that is respectful of other people, right?
Okay.
So, and I think, again, when I talk about history being a progression of the recognition of rights of more and more disenfranchised people, more and more people become enfranchised over time, right? It's that recognition. So, yes, everyone has individual rights.
But there's a responsibility that goes with those rights? That those rights are not absolute?
As individuals, I believe ethically, morally, I'm not saying I'm imposing or the government should be imposing it. Individuals should be imposing on themselves
a sense of self-discipline.
Exactly. Some sort of recognition of the fact that their rights actually, they don't cease to exist, but they do they bump up against the bubble of other people's rights. There was a great College Humor put out a great parody tune last year, and it was a song, and it was basically, fuck you, I'm all about freedom. But when I'm talking about freedom, I'm not talking about your freedom to live. I'm talking about my freedom not to give a shit, right? And it was hilarious, right? And to me, it kind of summed that all up, right? And it gets even worse when I hear that, okay, you've got anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, right, who are on the one hand, railing against, you can't make me wear a mask and stuff like that, right? But then they start abusing people who are wearing masks, right? That to me is the great big flag that goes up. That
Would
says,
you get the same flag for people wearing masks abusing people who aren't wearing masks? Or do you feel that's more acceptable?
No, I don't. Okay, in answer to the last question you just asked, I will say...
Do you see a moral equivalency there?
There is generally a moral equivalency. I will say it's at least...
But not exact?
49, 51. Like, I'll probably have more sympathy with someone wearing a mask come down on an anti-masker versus vice versa.
Why? Are they not
because,
the same
again,
thing?
I feel it's the responsible thing. To have worn a mask,
so it's
right?
slightly okay to abuse someone for not wearing a mask, but it's wholly unacceptable
The mask
to abuse someone who isn't.
The mask absolutely became a political totem, right?
It totally did.
I mean, we were talking one time, and I think we were watching the same thing by ourselves or something.
Yeah.
It was like, or I forwarded you a video, and it was a video from Question Period.
Yes,
and
indeed.
It was one of the conservative MPs, it doesn't matter which one, asking the government something.
Yeah, because I remember you saying, you can mute this because what's actually being said is completely irrelevant to my point. Yeah.
It was, okay, here's the conservatives, who are the official opposition.
Yeah.
Look how many masks you saw a few people wearing masks.
One or two, three.
They were in the minority for that side.
Yeah.
And then the government's response. And they go, I can't remember if it was a prime minister or it might have been a deputy prime minister.
Yeah.
Again, the message didn't matter.
Yeah.
What mattered was, look at the mask. They were all masked on the government side.
Everybody.
It became a political totem. And
I'm not questioning that.
Absolutely
And
did.
to be clear,
Absolutely did.
I was only answering the way I did to be thoroughly honest with you.
I appreciate that.
I'm not saying
I think it's absolutely important that
I'm
you
not
be
saying
thoroughly honest.
I'm not saying it's right. I was just honestly acknowledging that
It's
to
absolutely
me
essential.
it should be equally unacceptable
Right.
for people to be crapping on each
Yeah,
other from the
yeah,
other
exactly.
way. My perception is that there were more anti-maskers being abusive to people wearing masks than vice versa. And
I would agree with that, but only insofar as the maskers had the advantage of state institutions doing their abuse for them.
possibly.
The
And again-
anti-mask was from the bottom up popular uprising.
Yeah.
The pro-mask was a top-down imposition. So I don't need, if I think everyone should be wearing a mask, I don't need to accost people on the street because I have agencies of government who will accost them for me.
Well, and we've gone so far off of gun control here, but it's still coming
So
back.
yeah, let's steer it back.
If we can go back to the police's reaction and the amount of time it took, I feel, I hate to use that phrase, but I feel like it wasn't so much that the cops were worried about trying to kill protesters and getting killed back. I feel like it was the cops were having trouble kind of wrapping their heads around the situation they were in to a certain extent. And I think to a certain extent, there wasn't the legal or at least the narrative framework yet for them to go in and break up the protest.
Like you didn't think they were still trying to assess how much popular support there would be for the use of violence to put down the protest?
Well, the first thing was, I think the cops looked at it and go, it's a protest. We don't like it. They're being really annoying and they're very unpopular with the citizens of Ottawa. But so far, we're having trouble finding a law that they're breaking, kind of thing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that's when they went to get the injunction against the horns.
Yeah.
And then they went, and then they're like, well, what can we do that's to disrupt them and maybe send them packing? Well, let's seize their fuel and their food.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have a legal right, but we can do that, and it's not going in and breaking them. There's as kind of a parallel, the 2008 financial crisis. They made a movie about it from the point of view, I think, of Hank Paulson, who was chairman of the SEC. It wasn't the Fed, I don't think. Anyway, But as things started to cascade in the 2008 financial crash, it was like, well, we're going to have to bail out the banks. We can't bail out the banks. There's no way we're going to bail out the banks. There's no way. We're bailing out the banks. Oh, GM's going to crash. We can't bail out GM. That's how much money that is. And then people will never stand for it. We're bailing out GM, right? There's just kind of these, the thing kind of had, I think from the perspective of law enforcement, there was kind of a narrative cascade. Like, because they probably... The cops are probably like, well, these people burn themselves out and go away, and if we don't do anything about it, then we don't get on the news and we don't look bad and we don't have anything. Perspective. And then the Ottawa City Police Commission, you guys started using words like insurrection and
the political pressure placed upon the police.
Yeah, because left to their own devices, I don't think the police would have done anything. Left to their own
devices, the police probably would have left it alone. They would have pursued the path of
it was pressure from the top down, I think.
But once that pressure came from the top down, where you've got guys like Trudeau and you've got guys like Singh saying, this is an insurrection. Mm-hmm. This is an attempt to overthrow Parliament.
Yeah.
This is a rebellion by a bunch of misogynist white supremacists, and this is the language they used.
Yeah, absolutely.
To overthrow a legitimate government. And so to them, and... I take them at their word. Mm-hmm. They honestly believed that they were in mortal peril.
Yeah.
And so then they pushed the police into taking action. My thesis here is that the only thing right from the get-go that protected those protesters was not any artificial or not legislative form of restraint by the authorities. It was their potential of citizen self-defense. And once that potential was confirmed to not be there, they were completely at the mercy of the authorities. And the only thing that prevented violence, injury, and potentially death was the professionalism and self-restraint of the police officers present and the conduct of the police officers on the scene, as we saw in the last 36 hours of the 48 hours of the protest, can be described as utterly unprofessional and without restraint. We are fortunate. It was an act of coincidence and good fortune that no one was killed at that protest. Nothing more. Mm-hmm. Again, is this not exactly why the United States put in a Second Amendment? Is this not exactly like if this is not an example of protecting of the citizenry needing to protect themselves from an authoritarian state, then what is?
You've loaded the question. You've absolutely loaded the question.
Well, then unpack it for me.
Right. Based on your interpretation of it.
Okay.
And your presentation
give me an
alternate
interpretation.
What protected them from the get-go was to my mind, is exactly what I've spoken about. They went in there with the right to assembly and the right to protest.
So then why was that taken away?
And they used that right because over time, and time will have played into this in many different ways that become subjective.
Okay.
Right? In terms of, media coverage, sensation's gone, people getting tired of the story, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. That's when I feel probably the police felt one of the deciding factors could have been that they go, okay, the story is dying out. People aren't going to mind if we go in now.
Freedom of assembly has like a statute of limitations to it?
No.
You're only allowed to have freedom of assembly for so many days?
That's not my main point. And so I'm going to ask you to hear me out until I finish my... Because
fair.
That isn't my main point.
Okay.
My point, rights versus responsibilities.
Okay.
Right? They went in there with that right, and that right, it becomes the foundation of the hesitation on the part of the police.
Okay.
Their responsibility within those rights to behave as decent human beings towards their fellow citizens.
Okay.
Right? Wasn't one that I took particularly seriously. And I will say that the convoy organizers and the convoy as a whole suffered from what you said, what people, that perception of the presentation of certain elements being misogynistic, homophobic, racist, violent.
A threat to the existing order.
Right. And so, but you didn't have to go far. And, no one in the media had to go far to find examples of that expressed to them, right?
They kind of had to go far. Yeah, they kind of did.
They managed to find them. Now, am I
saying
that this
looking hard enough, you'll find, and if you can't find it, you can make it up.
Am I saying that this represented a majority of the convoy? No, right? But the other thing the convoy organizers and the convoy organizers did not do, and the convoy itself suffered from, is they did not at any point disassociate themselves from those uglier elements and those uglier incidents.
For those of you listening to this, I'm looking at Steve with a great incredulity and asking him to come into this point.
Yeah, I want to ask because there was the guy running around the swastika, the infamous swastika the Prime Minister mentioned. There was one guy, and he had painted
the first hour,
and he had painted it on a Canadian flag. And with the insinuation being that the government was asking like Nazis, not that he was himself a Nazi.
Yes.
Even still, the protest organizers got rid of him.
Yeah. Same thing with the guy with the Confederate.
And there was a Confederate flag, and they got rid of them right away.
Yeah.
Right. So where were these?
Yeah. I'm at a loss to understand.
Right.
Why you would say that
over
they
the course
disassociate
over
themselves
the course
from
of the time over the course of the
from
time
those elements,
right? Over the course of the protest, I heard of examples.
Okay.
Gay couples who had rainbow drapes or rainbow flags hanging from their balcony or whatever, and people shitting on their doorsteps, right? Abusing them, and again abusing people with masks, like verbally harassing them. And that wasn't anything I heard the convoy. There were organizers kind of in any way distancing themselves from or criticizing in any way.
I kind of did.
What I heard coming from the organizers was essentially that's them expressing. I wouldn't necessarily express myself that way. That's not how I feel. But they are here.
What should they have done? What would have satisfied you in that context?
I don't know, because again, in terms of not proving a negative, I don't know what can be done.
Like, let's say,
right?
what should they have said? Because you say, you're saying that they didn't distance themselves properly from those egregious examples, from those overreaches. Well, what should they have done?
They should have been very clear about that. This is not what this is about. What the message I got from the organizers was, this is a collection of people. They're all welcome. They're all here to protest in their own way because they've all got different issues. And we're not touching that with a 10-foot pole, right? They've got the right to do this, right?
Right.
And to me, that just emphasized the ugliness of it all.
A lot of I don't know. While this was going on, a lot of this stuff was like unsubstantiated. There was a lot of secondhand. I distinctly remember John Ivison of National Post. He has a regular show where, once a week, I think him and a couple of political hacks from Montreal or from Ottawa, do a 20-minute video on YouTube once a week.
Right.
And just called Ivison. And this one, while the protest was going on, I can't remember the name of the guy. It's one of his regular guys who's he works for he's a Liberal Party apparatchik. But he doesn't work for the party directly. He's got like a
arm's length kind of
a research thing or something. Anyway, but he's a little Liberal Party apparatchik. And instead of his other normal contributor, he had an actual National Post reporter who had been wandering around. Who I think she was like a parliamentary reporter. She lived in Ottawa, so she was there anyway. She was wandering around the protest.
Yes,
and
I think I'm familiar with this individual.
Yeah, and so she was. So Ivison asked her about her experience with the protest, and her experience was largely positive. She was talking. Yeah. She went around, talked to the people. All the people she talked to were friendly. She never saw anybody harass anybody or anything like that. And then and so she had a largely positive view of the protest. And the put the time frame, I guess, in place. This was after the court order to stop honking came down.
Right.
But everybody was still positive, and she had a largely positive experience. Ivison then goes to his other guest, other co-host, who was like, well, that's not what I heard. That's not what our experience. And he didn't have any personal experience. He just talked about one of his staffers who said she was verbally assaulted.
Yeah, they had differing anecdotal accounts.
Yeah.
Well, and even then,
but even then, the liberal guys was secondhand.
Yeah,
and the reporter was working off her own experience.
I have not claimed at any point that it was 100% or even majority out of control or necessarily ugly. Mm-hmm. Right?
Well, and I would go so far as to say that the perception is reality. Like if we want to take this into, to steer back to the idea of gun control and the idea of firearms as being necessary to vouchsafe your human rights, it doesn't matter whether or not the Liberal Democrats were correct in perceiving this as an attempt to overthrow Parliament. It doesn't matter whether they were factually correct. They believed that force was warranted. They believed that they were right to use force. Whether that was factually correct or not doesn't matter. It's moot.
Okay,
completely moot.
First of all, I will say that insurrectionists, no, this wasn't January 6th. Right?
It doesn't matter.
It
doesn't matter whether it factually was or wasn't. Right. That was the excuse they used.
It's overblown, right? Completely overblown. All right, but
when a steel baton is coming down on your skull,
I want to come at this from the other point of view, right?
Okay.
Let's say you're one of the citizens of Ottawa.
Yep.
Right, and all this has come down on you, right? Right outside your window, right on your doorstep, is this bunch of people who are coming in here, and they just don't give a shit about you. They are here to make a whole lot of noise. So, and they're claiming, I've got rights, I've got...
And it's infringing on my rights.
What about my rights?
Yes.
What about my expectation that the police are going to do something about this? Right? They should be doing something about this to, peace, order, good government, even life, liberty, the American way. Right? Any of these concepts, from the point of view of a citizen of Ottawa, I think my biggest problem with where you're coming at this from, is that it's all about the rights of the truckers. Rights. Like I said, rights are for everyone. And when everyone has rights, there's a bubble going on here, right? So in the absence of the police doing anything, right? Let's say that the police and the government don't involve themselves; they just carry on, just policing
maybe they take the approach to say, look, let it burn out, let it burn itself out.
Right.
We just let them do what they're going to do. They're going to get tired. They're going to leave.
If you're a citizen of Ottawa and this is going on, and you don't believe this is reasonable, what conversation? What conversation are we having about them? We're talking about the rights of the protesters.
Well,
what are the rights of the citizens of Ottawa?
Identical conversation that we had with the Wet'suwet'en protest, which lasted longer, was violent, involved destruction of property, was nationwide in every major city, not just Ottawa, did have the potential of a propane shortage in Quebec in the middle of winter, which would definitely would have endangered lives.
You're going down the wrong road.
No.
There's a lot of Albertans who were laughing about that.
It did not when our rail crossings were blocked. Yet that was fine. Why the contrast? Why the double standard? If it's okay for a protest to be violent, to go on indefinitely, to have material ramifications. No, it's not. Context is not different. The only context is that a progressive protest was allowed by government. A non-progressive protest was ruthlessly suppressed. So without the ability of citizen self-defense, the only thing you have with your rights is that you have government approval.
I've already pointed out it's not that cut and dry. It's not that black and white.
It's totally that black and white.
It isn't.
Let's take a different tact, different protest. Let's talk about the insurrection of January 6th versus the months and months of vandalism and arson.
The summer of love
in Portland.
Yeah.
right?
Or a lot of cities, actually.
A lot of cities, but Portland was the highlight.
Yeah,
right. Like,
what was that city? Kenosha.
Oh yeah, Kenosha, Wisconsin, where Kyle Rittenhouse got in trouble. Yeah. But very few people have been, are going to be charged from the damage done in Portland, and they did hundreds of millions of dollars of damage.
Yeah.
Versus January 6th, they're going after everybody they can get a photo recognition on.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, again, it comes down to, what the quote I gave earlier, that protest then becomes simply nothing more than being an approved advocate or, a flunky for the state. Mm-hmm. You're only allowed to protest so long as what you're saying is approved by the state. Mm-hmm. Then, you got the right to free speech so long as, that is approved speech. You don't, you're okay if you're simply opening the Overton window for what the given power structure of the day already wants. And that was clearly the BLM protest.
Yeah, but now, we're getting into the rights versus responsibilities, as far as I'm concerned. And expectations, because that was an interesting point that you raised a while ago when we talked about rule, intent, expectation.
Well, right? I mean, we've had this conversation before, but when you talk about the protesters' rights versus the rights of the people of Ottawa.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we live in a country where so far you can live where you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
So far,
you live in the national capital.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a political city by nature. When people come to redress a grievance against the federal government, they're coming there because that's where it is. Okay, so living in Ottawa, you have to understand that. For me, it's like someone who builds a house against up next to a pre-existing shooting range and then complains about the noise.
I'm not without sympathy for the citizens of Ottawa. I do get that a lot of them were, especially those downtown residents, were really dragged into something that they really didn't want anything to do with. And they were kind of collateral damage. And I'm not without sympathy for them. But again, is the trade-off between rights and responsibilities. Should there, the whole thing could have been easily de-escalated right from the get-go if somebody from government had simply said, okay, let's sit down, let's talk. Let's see if we can't work something out. It's not like they didn't have notice. It's not like they didn't see the protesters coming days in advance.
Weeks.
Yeah, weeks.
Right?
It's not like they didn't know this was going to happen.
And it
could have been prevented.
Is there no responsibility of the government to engage?
Yeah.
Right? And there was zero engagement from the government.
Yeah.
I'm not
they dug in their heels.
You're right. I agree with you on that. Right?
So
that is a function of
for
democracy.
A protest to be good, it's got to be disruptive, right?
That's true.
Right? Not to invoke MLK, but when they're doing what was the bus boycott in Montgomery,
yep.
Right?
But that
would have been disruptive to everybody.
That kind of is the point. Like when Extinction Rebellion seized bridges in every major municipal center in Canada on the same day.
Yeah.
The point was to be disruptive. If they had simply stood by the side of the road with those bridges, holding up signs, or say maybe at red lights, and at the red lights, go to the cars and hand out brochures and pamphlets saying, hey, man, maybe give some thought to your carbon footprint.
You're right. The effect isn't going to be the same.
The effect's not going to be the same.
Yeah, but I mean, it's shock value. I get it.
And yeah, you got to get people's attention. And that is the definition of protest.
So we're talking Second Amendment. Let's talk First Amendment here. We're talking freedom of speech, right?
Yeah.
So this to me is where a fundamental responsibility comes in, right? There are, and hear me out, because you're gonna freak as soon as I say get halfway through this sentence.
Okay.
Right?
I love these.
There are limits on the right to free speech. And I'm not saying I'm
yelling fire in a crowded theater?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, that's one example of it.
That's really a bad analogy because, of course,
I've
always the classic.
I've hated that analogy. Yeah, but you're right. It is the classic. So I'm not trying to use that. Again, it comes down to free will, and yet behaving in a way that's ethical and moral, right? Going back to the good faith argument, right? All it takes for good faith to fall apart is for one person to gaslight. And in my opinion, we've seen so much of that come out of 2016. And I feel to a certain extent 2015 here coming out of the left. But as soon as people start gaslighting, right, good faith is gone, right? That's also part of free speech. One is allowed to say whatever we want by right. But it really isn't that simple. That there are things we should not be saying as responsible human beings.
Like what? I say this as a fairly free speech absolutist. I'm not the absolute free speech absolutist. Like, I'm not against libel laws necessarily. But I am against British libel laws.
I think the whole concept of it usually comes down to hate speech of some sort, and I hate that whole concept of hate speech, like just using those terms, homophobic speech, misogynistic speech, sexist speech, but mostly it's racist and homophobia are probably the best examples, right?
So that speech that you feel should be restricted or prohibited.
Well, no, I'm saying this is the trick when it comes to these rights, whether it's Second Amendment, gun rights, First Amendment rights, freedom of speech. Yeah, it's all well and good to go out there and say something, but there are a lot of impressionable people who can hear some very, very ugly things, take it to heart, and do nasty things as a result of it. And it perpetuates an ugliness that is, counter to the progressive nature I've seen of human society. I mean, there's always going to be ugliness, right? And to me, I'm not saying I have the answer, right? This is the trade-off, right? It's balancing out the rights and knowing that there's going to be ugliness and you just can't stop. It's like for our generation, this whole concept of safe spaces at universities, like, qu'est-ce que c'est, right? I mean, what the hell?
Qu'est-ce que fuck?
Right?
Please, this is a family podcast.
No, it's not.
It most certainly is not.
Wow.
So again, it's this fine line we're walking. Rights and responsibilities. I agree with you. All sorts of rights to protest. But those protesters have zero sympathy for me. And they had zero sympathy for me before they even started heading across the continent.
Sure, but
right?
Well, sympathy for you in what way? And because here's the thing.
Because frankly, let's out with it. I think they're a bunch of big fucking babies. Oh no, okay. I don't want to have to wear a mask. I don't want to have to show respect or consideration for my fellow man. In fact, I'd rather abuse them for it. Fuck off. You're a bunch of big fucking babies.
So rights again. So you feel that you should have the power to abrogate certain rights?
No, I'm saying I have the right to call them fucking assholes and babies.
All right, that's fair.
Right?
But
fuck them.
But what does that mean? What does fuck them mean?
It means they deserve none of my respect, none of my consideration. Right?
So it's okay again. I'm talking steel batons coming down on skulls. That's okay now?
Have rights. They can have rights.
Well, then, okay. Right. I mean, nobody says you got to agree with them. Just like with the Kanasahak.
Or glad they can have the right to sweat
protest. They had no sympathy for me, but I can't say that they shouldn't have been allowed to protest.
What we keep missing in all these conversations across the board, right, is the fact that we live in a democratic society. Yes, there are rights, right? But the way the system is set up is democratic. And we've had this, in a number of contexts, we've had this conversation. And it is simply this. The majority of Canadians, I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure The majority of Canadians supported vaccines, supported vaccine mandates, supported masks, didn't have sympathy for the trucker convoy, right? When it comes down to it, and the same with gun rights, and we've had this. I'm not coming down on gun rights. I don't think gun rights should be abrogated. I'm just saying the majority of Canadians on all these issues are kind of the same mind, and it's almost like, you know what?
But
suck it up. Right?
This is how you know, because that the democracies are losing their way, I guess, because one of the highlights of democracy, even though like at its worst, democracy is two wolves and a sheep arguing over what to have for lunch.
Right.
At its best, it's something that acknowledges that the rights of minorities need to be protected.
Yes.
Right?
Majority rule with respect for minority wishes.
Yes. So if I can I'll make an argument for the truckers here. And we're getting off target, but we're kind of not, because
no, we're not. I think we're on target here because we've connected a couple of important dots here.
From my perspective, the truckers weren't protesting masks as much as they were protesting vaccines, even though something like 80% of them were vaccinated.
Yeah,
they were opposing the mandate.
Protesting the vaccine mandate.
Okay, but here's the thing: the vaccine. So what's the vaccine supposed to do? The only thing these vaccines do is ameliorate the effects that happen to you. The vaccines don't prevent the spread.
Yeah, they don't prevent transmission.
They don't prevent transmission.
They don't prevent infection.
All they do is ameliorate the effects, the symptoms, to the person who gets them. Yeah. So there's no...
What a horrible concept.
Okay, but that's up to me if I want to suffer the effects. Because it doesn't make a difference to you.
You know what?
Yeah,
I got so little time for this.
Why? Why? Because this is fact.
You know, I want to get in my time machine, and I want to get the special tool that sucks vaccines out of people. I want to go back to the fucking 50s and 60s and suck out all the measles vaccines that everyone got back in the day.
No, stop.
Seriously,
this vaccine is not those vaccines.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to start screaming, but this vaccine is not that. This is a novel technology.
Yeah.
Both the mRNA and the adenovirus vaccines. The adenovirus uses some existing...
Keep talking. I'm going to get coffee.
Some existing technology, but it's still novel. Okay? The mRNA vaccines are completely novel. So if they tell you they're safe, they don't know. They're lying to you because they don't know. There's no record. There is 2 years of data on mRNA vaccines. Okay? I've heard a number of people say, well, vaccines...
Nothing.
The vaccines.
I don't want to say that word out loud.
The negative effects of vaccines turn up usually within 4 months. Okay, but mRNA vaccines are not that. It's a completely new way of provoking an immune response. It's completely new. It's not an attenuated. The vast majority of vaccines are attenuated virus or something and that kind of thing. mRNA is completely different. It's a completely different medical intervention. So you can't associate the effects of mRNA vaccines with the effects of traditional vaccines.
Well, actually, I believe I can.
No, you can't. They're different. It's a completely different medical intervention. It's as different as a pill and surgery. Okay? It's a completely and utterly different medical vaccine. So the only person who's affected by not getting a vaccine is the person who does not get the vaccine, because it does not affect his ability to catch it. It does not affect his ability to transmit it. It only affects
his symptoms.
His symptoms. That's all it does. Okay? So you have this brand new technology, this brand new medical technology with no safety history. There may not be an indication that it's harmful, but there's no indication that it's safe. And the government is telling you that if you want to continue your job, you have to take this new technology that we have no idea of whether it's safe or not. We don't know the long-term effects.
Well, again, now we're into this gray zone that was the epidemic that showed up 2 years ago.
Sure.
Right? 2.5 years ago. Right? We're all watching with accelerating concern about what's coming out of Wuhan, China back in the day. Right? January 2020. Right? So...
Sorry, before you carry on with your point, I just want to say that that outburst is from someone who is double mRNA vaxxed and did it voluntarily, and I don't regret it, but I made a calculation based on the data that was available to me. I understood I'm overweight and I have respiratory problems. And so while there was a risk to the unknowns of the vaccine, there was a risk, a higher probably than normal risk of me catching COVID. So I chose to take the gamble on the vaccine, and we'll see how that plays out.
I just hate it when Steve goddamn soft soaps everything. Like, what do you feel, man?
When I hold back and
do
tell you how I really
first of all,
feel?
you know, like quit coating it in sugar.
Well, first
and
of all-
tell me what you feel, man. God,
He's not that overweight, folks. No, actually, I don't know whether to feel pleased with myself or
appalled.
or ashamed for actually provoking probably the longest string of words to come out of Steve's mouth.
I think a little of column A, a little of column B, because that was gold.
And you know, certainly the most impassioned words come out of Steve's mouth in all the times we've been doing this.
I thought he was coming over the table.
And I do apologize to you, Steve, if I did offend you with where I was coming from on that. But and we're obviously all getting a bit impassioned.
The argument about all the old vaccines, like measles, mumps, rubella, and polio, and all this stuff that have saved hundreds of millions of lives. It's a false argument because mRNA vaccines, the COVID vaccines, are not those. It's a different medical intervention, and when people don't acknowledge that, it pisses me off because it's acting in bad faith.
I'm not.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
Hey, that's a trump card, eh? Now when we say that's bad faith, it's kind of like throwing down the gauntlet.
Shut the hell up.
Well, fuck you, man. No, actually, I do have two responses to that. The one is, I believe my point is still valid because the anti-vaxxers who are out there are not making that point. They're talking specifically just in terms of how Paddy is presenting things, which is rights.
Yeah.
Right? I have the right not to be vaccinated. Right?
Well, in the context
I'm
of what these
like,
things do, they do have the right not to be vaccinated as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah, but...
Bodily autonomy.
And this is where I talk about social responsibility. As a culture, as a society, right? We have benefited from the fact that for generations, we have been vaccinated against all these other things, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we'd be in a much worse place if we hadn't had all those things, those shots back in the day. And it became just kind of second nature. It's just something we did, which is frankly something that shocked me about this whole anti-vax thing in the first place.
Yeah,
it was
but,
kind of like really? You're going to make a right about this now?
At the same time, we would have been a much worse place as a society if we didn't build highways. You know, like we have to, like our transportation infrastructure is instrumental to our quality of life. And if we didn't have, you know, rail and highways and airports, we'd all be worse off. And you're asking, what the hell has that got to do with vaccines? The vaccines you are talking about, as Steve has mentioned twice now, bear no relation to the COVID vaccine.
All right, so which brings me to my second point, but I'm still arguing.
Because otherwise, I'm going to compare airports to the vaccine. They're just as related to each other.
Well, no.
You cannot compare the vaccine for measles,
at least
smallpox. You can't, because they are prophylactic. The COVID vaccine, in fact, I don't even like the word vaccine for it because it is not a prophylactic. In immunological terms, it is what they call leaky, in that it does not prevent infection. It does not prevent transmission. It is a treatment. It is not a vaccine. It is a treatment. It is a mitigation of symptoms.
Again, I believe it was the better thing to do. Right? If the government had done nothing...
Sure.
We can't prove a
but
negative.
Now again, we're talking about you
happened.
trying to impose your beliefs on other people.
Oh, blah, 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 blah. Suck it up.
So, like, there you go. We go back to the thing. I should be allowed. I'm smarter. I'm better. I'm progressive. I should be allowed to control your life.
No.
That's kind of what it comes down to. Let me change the focus of this. Let me maybe give you guys a different way to look at this.
We're going off the rails here, I think.
Yes. Let us go back in the mists of time.
We're talking about guns, not vaccines. But
to 11th of July, 1990.
But do you need a vaccine?
But do you need a vaccine? Touche. The Kahana-Satake standoff.
Oh, man. Okay, we're going back.
The Oka, or at Oka, between the Mohawk Nation and the Sûreté du Québec the RCMP, and basically the mechanism of the Canadian state.
And then the Canadian Forces.
Yes. Yep. A 78-day standoff. Rather than summarize the whole blow-by-blow history of the standoff, let's talk about the significance. And looking at the Canadian Encyclopedia, it was instrumental in the creation of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which in turn contributed to new agreements between governments and Indigenous peoples. Federal and provincial governments have developed a greater awareness of territorial rights of First Nations. The need to consult Indigenous peoples has now been enshrined in our legislative framework. We have the new fabricated legal concept of the honor of the crown, completely in regards to our legislative framework with First Nations and questions of development and economic policy. We have the Idle No More movement, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls in Canada inquiry, the attention to a large part of all Native issues, be it from residential schools to drinking water and reserves. A lot of this came out from the downstream effects of the Oka standoff.
Absolutely, because that was, a bunch of business interests trying to build a golf course on sacred land.
Yes, and their history of trying to address those concerns through the legal process go back to 1761 and were fruitless.
Right.
I put it to you both, strictly from the Mohawk point of view. Would their rights have been honored if they did not have firearms? From the Mohawk point of view, put yourself in their shoes. I'm not asking you to agree with them.
Probably not. I mean, you're absolutely right.
I mean,
you're absolutely right. But
what about their rights? I mean, where was the charter for them? Where was the court system for them?
Okay, I think we are getting way off track. So I'm going to try and pull this back together, but I will note the irony of going from rights of protesters, trucker convoy, good, rights of
Kahanawake.
Kahanawake.
There was Kahanasatake and Kanawake. And they're really easy to confuse.
Bad, rights of Mohawks at Oka, good. That's an interesting path to take.
I'm saying I think both good.
I think to what Steve expressed a couple of minutes ago, we have gotten way off track. And the reason we've gotten way off track is there are a lot of things tied up in this.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlapping.
And so what
issues.
It's come down to is the perception of using the American Second Amendment of the Constitution as a starting point, as a need, and comparing a situation in which that need is presented. What we're actually arguing about right now is whether or not the trucker convoy created a circumstance under which that need existed. You're saying yes, I'm saying no, right? So that's the way that it was presented at me. So I'm
kind of that's kind of a neither here nor there for me. I'm simply
that's the question I heard being
wanted
asked.
to ask, was there protest if the government knew from day one that they had no capacity for self-defense, would that protest have lasted as long as it did?
Where?
In the trucker convoy.
I believe it.
If the government had known from the get-go those people were defenseless,
I am not convinced.
Would they have crushed it in the first 72 hours?
I am not convinced it was a factor at all. And if it was, it wasn't the only factor. And
I initially felt the same way, but then the more I started looking at quotes, like the ones I read off at the beginning, the more I honestly believe that it was a powerful force of restraint on behalf of the government. So long as the question remained unanswered, it was the force of restraint for the government.
No, I think it was, and I think we've discussed it in different terms. But basically, it was more, if we ignore them, we don't give them any recognition, right? It's like, and so same thing. If we go in and we start knocking heads together, arresting them, I don't know.
So why did they suddenly decide that knocking heads together was the way to go?
Because there were a lot of other things that escalated out of there. You had what was happening in Coots. You had the
Ambassador Bridge one?
The Ambassador Bridge.
Which was, but both the Coots protest and the Ambassador Bridge protest were
wrapped up before.
Like a week before they wrapped up the Ottawa one.
Yeah, before Ottawa was put down.
Yeah.
Right.
They were gone. The bridge was open. The Coots border crossing was open for a week.
But I imagine in the time that occurred, that pressure will have changed, will have accelerated on the Ottawa Police Department. But anyways, I'm trying to step away from the trucker convoy in Ottawa.
Sure.
Specifically, not because, because obviously it could take up a whole episode on its own.
Mm-hmm. Almost did.
Right? It covers 3 topics at least on its own, right? I'd like to table it, put it over there.
Yep.
It's on the back burner.
Yep.
We need to get back to the brass tacks of this, which is more fundamental. And I think we need to get away from specific examples that we're going to be able to...
Would you allow me to frame it and by saying, are firearms necessary for the preservation of civil liberties?
I guess I don't see that.
Okay.
I see them as useful in terms of self-defense and self-preservation.
On the individual level.
At the individual level. I see them as a useful tool in a country such as Canada with so much rural space. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of people who live out away from the big city.
Yep. Or they're a form of predator control or varmint control.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're an agricultural tool.
So in that respect, I don't see it ever being possible for the government to justify taking away all firearms.
How about a place like the UK?
Well, actually,
where it's almost exclusively urban.
Well, it's funny you say that. I guess it is, but what blows my mind about the UK is that they've got, 3 times our population?
Something like that.
What, 56 million? I think
no, it's
higher than that.
It's between 75 and 90.
It's bumping on the door of 80.
Let's take a quickie look-see. Or are you looking that up, Steve?
I'll look it up.
Yeah, it's
they've got a population
not a huge thing, but
that's 2.5 to 3 times the population of Canada. In a space that fits into Alberta, I
basically
think 5 times, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it would fit that much, but at least once or twice.
Just over 68.5 million. So
okay, so I was close.
3 times, yeah.
I was close. Well, no, we're 30 million.
So it's twice.
So about double our population.
Yeah, I don't do so well with arithmetic.
But okay, so
I'm gonna say
it's Alberta, say 3 times.
The land
no, the UK fits into Alberta 3 times easier.
Is it 3 times? Okay, so right. So what blows my mind is that there actually is green space in the UK.
I know, eh?
You can take a train between London and Birmingham, and there will be green on either side.
Yeah, like wow.
Sometimes trees,
Yeah.
Well, people don't realize that the real depths. Like if I heard it once expressed that if the whole world lived, or the entire population of the world lived in the population density of Manhattan, the entire population of the world would fit into Texas.
I guess. I don't know if that's really desirable. But.
No, it wouldn't be. But I mean, is
sorry, say that again.
If the entire world lived with the population density of Manhattan,
it would all fit into
Texas.
Oh my God!
It'd be a Texas-sized megacity, but boy.
Yeah. So that aside, whether we're in a rural population or an urban population, how do we then protect our rights from a government such as the one we have now, which sees those rights as an impediment, as an inconvenience, and a very unnecessary affectation? Well, if firearms are not an option for that, if an armed citizenry is not an option for that, what is our option?
This is where we do really get back to the nuts and bolts of the conversation.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, it is definitely a political conundrum right now. Mm-hmm. It's a political battle, and it's relying on one's fellow citizens whose perception is, as you just have correctly noted so many times, well, who needs these things anyways? I don't need this, so therefore I don't really care if someone else's rights in this regard get taken away, right? And I think that's where the very concept of the right to own a firearm becomes nebulous, right? It's not seen as a right, which ties in with the whole concept. Well, why do you need a gun, right? That's the obvious thing going on.
Why do you need freedom of speech?
I don't think it's helpful to tie those two together.
I think it's essential.
I would agree. I think it is essential. Yeah.
They are indivisible.
Dave Chappelle put it in one of his Netflix specials at the end. I think it was a Netflix special or was it whatever. Mm-hmm. He said at the end, he's like, the second is there in case the first don't work out.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It's like saying, well, say in a context of, say, like a social credit score in China. Why do you need a computer? Why do you need internet access? We can say, oh yeah, you got freedom of speech. You're in house arrest. You're not allowed to leave your home. Oh, but you can say whatever the hell you want while you're in your house. You know what I mean? How like they're connected. A right is meaningless without the means to exercise that right, and that's where the firearm comes in. What is it? I'm going to look something up here. You're about ready to say something, so I'll give you the floor.
Well, I mean, if you take this far enough, and I'm about to, it can get absurd, right? And I think it was last episode when we talked about Life of Brian and the PFJ sitting around the arena and Stan wanting to be Loretta, right? He wanted the right to have babies. So just because someone wants a right to something or demands a right to something, does that mean they should have that right? And I think that, again, that's the crux of people trying to grasp the right to bear arms in the States or the right to own a gun in Canada.
There are reasonable demands and there are unreasonable demands. What's reasonable?
So now it's so I don't have a problem with a responsible law-abiding citizen owning a gun. No problem whatsoever, right? And we've pretty much all agreed on that, right? The problem isn't the law-abiding citizens owning guns. But now we're talking about the what-ifs, right? You talk about the need. Well, who gets to question my need? Now you're still talking essentially as a hunter or as a recreational shooter, right? The line we've crossed here at this point, once we get, and I don't even know if we've made third order yet, and apparently there's a fourth. Now we're talking insurrection against an oppressive government, a tyrannical government, right? Now that's no longer law-abiding. So we're getting into way different philosophy at this point. And I think that's why we're butting heads right now. I do not see what happened in Ottawa as the beginning of tyranny. I don't think we're there yet.
Well, let me give you a quote from Charles Cook. He says, "Now, as ever, the quality of a free society is measured by how that society protects its liberties when they have been abused, not by how well it celebrates them when they are under no strain." Whether or not our rights are under, like whether or not our rights factually are under attack in the post-COVID world. Or let me rephrase, maybe not under attack, but whether or not a large segment of our political elite sees our human rights as negotiable or situational or not is of secondary concern to me to the question of how we vouchsafe those rights. Maybe, you know what? Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I am being overly concerned when I don't need to be. Maybe my insistence on having a fire extinguisher in the kitchen and a fire extinguisher in the shop is maybe a little overkill. Maybe I don't need 2 fire extinguishers. Maybe I don't need any fire extinguishers at all. We've got a good fire department, but it doesn't hurt for me at least to be aware of the possibility of fire. Let's approach this from that angle. If we cannot vouchsafe our civil liberties through the possession of firearms, what's our option?
I guess
I'm not saying we have to be in a situation where those civil liberties are in threat. Let's pretend they're not. Let's pretend that it's all sunshine and gumdrops. How do we protect our civil liberties for that rainy day in the the indeterminate future?
I think you've hit on a really good aspect of this conversation that because I think I essentially came into this thinking we were going to discuss Canada not much at all. The U.S. being the de facto locus of this conversation anytime it comes up. And speaking to your gumdrops and sunshine and daffodils and bunny rabbits and all that shit.
Yeah, assuming that civil liberties are not at all in danger in Canada.
Well, I think I look at
that assumption.
And so this is where I'm going in my head now, and I'm not claiming any accuracy to any point of view at this point. I think I'm seeing things through the prism of Canadian history and filtering that through the prism of American history. And I'm just looking at this going, on the whole, as a society, now there will be individuals who have fallen through the cracks of the statement that's going to follow. Gun ownership and gun control, gun rights, they're almost a non-conversation.
Why?
Because in general, they haven't been an issue. And as I keep saying, Bowling for Columbine emphasized that to me. It's just... Yes, we have Canada, criminal acts cause,
in Canada, traditionally, we haven't worried about these things because it was never really a concern. Like all through...
Exactly.
I mean, aside for a brief period where another prime minister named Trudeau committed some of the same mistakes with the FLQ crisis and the McDonald Dirty Tricks Commission. But other than that, we haven't really had any time period in at least the post-war history of Canada, aside from maybe, say, the conscription crises of both wars.
Yeah,
let's say
but those were pre-war.
Yeah, let's say post-1946, in the modern era.
Yeah.
We haven't really been in a situation in Canada where we're kind of saying, gee, my civil liberties in question? Are they negotiable? Are they situational? This is a new debate for us. And I'm going to backtrack a bit. In reference to the Oka standoff, I think they have very much been in doubt for our First Nations peoples for a long time.
And I think that is a reckoning that started then.
I would not blame a Native guy at all for saying, okay, Whitey, welcome to my world, where you are always concerned that your rights are negotiable, that your rights are situational. Whether that's the truth or not, doesn't matter. That's the perception, and the perception is the reality. So this is a new discussion for Canadians.
Well, I think, and it's been a long time coming. It's a reckoning that I think it's what we need to have. But again, another episode.
Well,
right?
yeah, and gun control or gun prohibition, which is what gun control is, ties into that. If we are not able to vouchsafe our civil liberties for ourselves, what will do it for us? I don't have a good answer for that question. I don't think anyone has an answer for that question other than the voluntary restraint of the political power. And as Mr. Trudeau and Singh have so ably demonstrated, we have zero reason to be confident in their restraint.
See, I think our system of government, as it was designed, essentially had no limiting principles built into the basis of it.
Like the Westminster
Well, that
parliamentary system.
and just the British North America Act, and then eventually, and it was accidentally, the limiting principles were basically, I think, the goodwill of the people involved, which is what differentiates it from the American system,
Right.
which is like when the Americans came up with their system, they were like, well, we're people of goodwill or good or good.
Good faith.
Good faith.
Goodwill, good faith. Yeah,
Good
yeah.
faith. How did I forget good faith?
Yeah.
We're people of good faith, but we can't assume that the people coming after us will be people of good faith. They understood
Right.
that they couldn't guarantee that all the people coming in line that would be in their positions would be like them.
And they also sought to deliberately limit the power of government.
Yes.
Whereas our approach has simply been to demarcate the powers of government between the provincial and the federal.
Yeah.
Not at all to limit.
Exactly. But the limiting factor has always been the goodwill or the good faith of the people in that.
Yeah, in other words, what can we get away with?
Exactly. Right? What can we get away with? And then when the Constitution was rewritten by Trudeau the Elder, that was a feature, not a bug.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
That
there's no limiting principles.
Yep.
That's a feature.
And that property rights were expressly and deliberately omitted from that document.
Yep.
And that written, as you say, it is a feature, not a bug. It is baked into the cake that at any moment, by the stroke of a pen, every single one of the rights in the Charter may be abrogated.
Yes.
They are not absolute. They are, and like, what was it Kevin Williamson wrote? That this is why in the American system, certain rights are considered absolute. And that he meant to say, there are some things that you don't get to vote on.
Yeah.
There are things that we consider sacrosanct, that are absolutes.
Yes.
And that, as you like the idea of democracy being two wolves and a sheep arguing what's on the menu for lunch. Mm-hmm. There are certain things the wolves do not get to vote on.
Yeah.
One of them being the life of the sheep.
Yeah.
And that was, that American approach to government, which we don't have. And we took for granted, and now we're starting to look down the business end of that and say, is this really where we want to be?
Yeah. And that's what, my belief is that every democracy needs some anti-democratic elements in it to moderate, to put the brakes on it, right? Like it doesn't need not something that can impose. Given that we live in a common law system, that not something that can impose legislation, but something that can say you
or
can't
at least
impose.
slow it down.
Yeah,
like a speed bump.
I can't help laughing. I was just like, do you need elements to prevent anti-democratic?
You know what? Yeah, I know you mean it facetiously, but it's a good reference to have.
Actually,
do you need freedom of conscience? Do you need bodily autonomy? Do you need the franchise? Do you need democracy?
Well, I mean, democracy is another conversation too.
No, do you?
We're not having that today.
Representative
but
government.
Here's a question I want to throw back at you guys. Okay, so let's say you had
3 apples.
You had
and Steve took 2.
You had the scope. Sorry. Mm-hmm. You had the scope to roll things back as far as you could in terms of Canadian law and firearm ownership. Right? the worry being presented is how do we prevent tyranny in Canada? Which is a weird. I'm still wrapping my head around this, but okay, fair shake. Just because it's never happened,
Exactly.
doesn't
Like I
mean
said,
it never
this
could.
is virgin ground.
Right?
This is virgin ground for Canadians.
I've never looked at Canada that way, but as I've already said, this podcast up to 10 years ago, I thought Canada was just the greatest place on earth to live. Now I want to live almost anywhere else because everything's just gone goofy. Like I don't recognize the place anymore. So let's say that's what the aim is, right? Now, what is reasonable? What are you looking for? What do you want? You need access to everything?
I want to hear your thoughts on
this,
this,
Steve. 50 cals. You need Carl
50
G's.
cals, Carl
There was that motorcycle with the motor in the sidecar we saw on Facebook recently.
I could throw something out if you want to gather your thoughts on this, Steve.
On what I want? So are you asking like if I could have everything? Or should I take into consideration
or if
political realities
let's say,
within Canada?
starting from the current laws, right? And ignoring the law that's coming in or has just come in.
I can tell you, I've thought about this a lot.
How far do we roll it back? How far do you want to roll it back? Till everything's available to everyone?
It's not a rollback. It's a complete restructure. Take the entire Firearms Act out because it's a fucking mess. It's a disaster.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it's like the world's most rotten onion. It's full of layers and there's so much
Blow
shit.
it up and start over.
Oh, I'm pretty sure somewhere in the world there's an onion more rotten than that. But
sure, but
I don't know.
I'm not saying
You'd
it's
have
the
to
rotten
search.
onion. I'm saying it's a rotten onion.
you just said it's the most rotten onion in the world.
I did not mean. Sorry if I did that. I misspoke. I didn't mean. Okay. It is a rotten onion.
It's in the top. It's in the top 10.
So it is a complicated rotten mess. So for me, for what I would think is politically feasible, look, I'm a gun control, an anti-gun control absolutist, right? Yeah. I am like battleships. You should be able to own a battleship. You should be able to own a howitzer if you can afford it. Okay? And my argument for that is, so say Elon Musk wanted to buy the USS New Jersey. Okay, fine. Because the USS New Jersey takes 2,600 people to run.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. To shoot one round would cost you $3,000 or $4,000 to shoot one round of the main guns, right? Never mind.
And that's just the cost of the round. That's not the cost
and never
of the
mind
labor.
the hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour for fuel. Never mind, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So how many people in the world could afford to do that who aren't governments?
Yeah, almost no one.
Almost no one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Practically speaking, no one.
I think if you can shoot the thing somewhere where it's not going to interfere the rights of other people, I think you should be able to have it. Now, that's not to say that if you have, say you buy a 155 howitzer, that I think you should be able to go shoot on Crown land. No. But the Army out in Wainwright has a training area and has a specific impact zone for artillery ammunition that they use 20 days out of the year. Right?
So are you saying rent it out?
Rent it out.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. Why not? So if you want to buy a Sherman tank, well, there's an impact zone for shooting tanks out in Wainwright, right? That the Army uses 20 to 30 days out of the year.
Okay.
Right?
Let's talk hand grenades. Let's talk M72s.
Should someone be allowed?
I think you should be allowed to have it, but I don't know why you'd want one.
50 cal.
Well, I know why you'd want one, but
It'd be a fun party trick.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
I
just
don't
it.
know what the practical use is.
Yeah, and then again, these things are expensive, right? Like an M72, I don't know what the Army unit cost an M72 is, but it's got to be a few $100, right? And
several thousand.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So if you're
50
paying,
cal M60.
In practical terms, I think there should be a graduated license.
sure.
In that when you're just starting off, say you're a brand new firearms owner, I think there should be an age limit. Beneath this age, I don't think you should be allowed to own a firearm. I'm going to say this isn't my hill to die on, but I'll throw a dart and I'll just say the age of 18.
Okay.
Once you're at the age of 18, before the age of 18, you may operate a firearm under the supervision of a licensed, registered not registered, but a licensed firearm owner or responsible firearm owner, sure. But you shouldn't be allowed to own one of your own until you are at the age of majority. If it's you're 18, you get on, you get your license. I think, much like driving, it should be a graduated license. that you are only allowed a certain kind of firearm with various limitations on that for, I don't know, given number of years.
Sounds like gun control to me, folks.
Yes, it is a form of gun control. Not prohibition, but control. And then I would like to, again, like this is I get to start from scratch, right? Like I'm going to completely rework the gun control legislation. I would like to then say, okay, if you have shown yourself over an amount of time to be a very responsible and non-dangerous firearms owner, like over a period of time, to quote the Edmonton Police recruiting, the only reliable predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So I think let's allow an individual to establish a track record of safe handling and safe, responsible practice. And then they would be allowed to own more complex, more potentially dangerous forms. So if you had someone who has a record of okay, I'm going to go to extremes. Let's say 30 years of collection of military firearms and this kind of equipment for historical or archival purposes. That person could then get a license as, say, a museum. I have no problem with that individual, say, owning a Vickers gun. Or say, if this individual wanted, say, to collect firearms that were notable in, say, the Vietnam conflict, I would have no problem with that individual who's got 30 years of history of responsible ownership and reliable, like, non-criminal behavior from saying, yeah, if the guy wanted to have a grenade as a historical resource, sure, maybe have several, because maybe he puts on a demonstration every year for educational purposes where people can come out and see these weapons in use in terms of say, education. People who are interested in the history of it to say, okay, it's one thing to read about this, say, given historical battle. Here's a chance for you to actually understand the noise involved.
Yeah.
That, you know, to see and to feel the shockwave, this sort of thing. So yeah, we're going to go out under very controlled circumstances, and we're going to demonstrate a grenade for the public who wants to.
Well,
like
for that
to me
for that
would
matter,
be a legitimate desire to own a grenade.
I don't think there's any reason why my range, which has, I don't know, 60, 70 acres or something like that.
Yeah.
Why can't they build a grenade bay? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
If it's simple, right? Because a grenade is what's lethal radius on a grenade is what, 5 meters?
Yeah. So do I think that anyone should be allowed to just have a grenade for any frivolous purpose? No. But I can see a legitimate desire for someone to have a grenade. Or say a museum, at the very least, to have a grenade and to detonate grenades for that purpose. So there should be a mechanism by which that should be allowed. If an enthusiast, if a collector, again, yeah, just say an enthusiast. Just in the same way you have black powder enthusiasts who like to go out with their flintlocks and their muzzle loaders, and they get dressed in period costume, and they demonstrate these firearms at various county fairs. I would have no problem with someone who has a demonstrated track record of responsible use having a 50 cal and saying, hey, and he's going to mount it on their fully restored half track or a historical military vehicle, of which there are many people who have these.
Yeah, usually rock stars.
Well, no, I mean, there are some like historical vehicle clubs.
Yeah.
And there are people in the United States who have
like an Alberta historical military
made it a
society.
labor of love and invested easily over $100,000 in it. But they actually have running Sherman tanks that actually move and go on their own. It becomes their sole purpose in life because they're hideously expensive to operate.
Oh, I know. Bruce Dickinson has a number of them. He's got his own T-34.
Yeah, but he's an exception because he is a millionaire. But what I mean is that there are working class people who have these things. They're pretty much all, say, I'm going to speculate, they're probably all heavy-duty mechanics. Because there's no way you could afford to hire somebody to do that. Like they service D9 cats on their own time. That's how they understand track systems and the suspensions and whatnot. But that individual, if it's a matter of saying, hey, I'm going to where in the same way that people demonstrate black powder firearms to community events, to demonstrate the 76 millimeter can, although that's kind of ridiculous because again, can you imagine the cost? It'd be outrageous.
You probably could. Can black powder enthusiasts put balls in their?
Oh yeah. Yeah, they like because they show the effects on target and whatnot. But like say a 50 caliber machine gun, I think that's a legitimate use as a way preserving a historical resource, so that when people see, I think it's a legitimate thing. People see these things in use in fiction, in film and whatnot. It would be useful. There is a certain utility in being able to go out to an event where say, hey, you can actually see one of these things being fired. And you can actually hear what it really sounds, how loud it really is, how fast is you can see the effects, on the target, say 100 meters downrange or what have you, provided it was done safely at a proper range and if there were proper berms in place and what have you. I don't have a problem with some of these, crazier, what seems on the surface to be crazier allocations. But again, it has to start from a more reasonable beginning.
Starting point.
Yeah. Like, for example, should an 18-year-old be allowed to have a semi-automatic firearm with unlimited ammunition, let's say drum magazine capacity? I'd say no. I would say no. Steve may disagree with me. But I would want to say, okay, kid, I'm willing to give you a bolt action or a lever action. Show me that you can handle this thing for a couple of years without hurting yourself or hurting anybody else. And then I want you to take a training course where you learn how to properly construct your own range, what kind of backdrop you need, what kind or backstop you need, an understanding of the potential for deflection, an understanding of lethal and effective ranges or lethal and maximum ranges of your ammunition. Demonstrate all of this stuff. And then, we'll let you have that semi-automatic with a 100-round drum magazine. Yeah. But show that you're a safe person first.
So what Paddy's describing is actually not too dissimilar from the Czech system.
Yeah?
It's the Czech system. They start essentially with a hunting license that gets you into bolt action rifles or shotguns and stuff like that, and that system graduates all the way up to working with explosives. And right below explosives, I think is their level for machine guns, and it's all legal with the right licensing.
Yeah,
in the Czech Republic.
Progressive training
and
and credentials within the system.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I would actually do within the Canadian context, as opposed to, yes, I would like Elon Musk to be able to buy the Battleship New Jersey if he wants to. That's my absolute position. In the actual practical realities of the Canadian situation, I would keep a licensing system something similar to what we have. The personal history questions seem invasive, but I don't know that they're irrelevant.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
And as Ben said to me once, he's like, the government's power ends at the license, granting the license, really, because once they give me the license to buy the thing, it's up to me to comply with the law. Yeah. So it's up to me whether I go crazy or not, right? So this thing that I'm holding in my hands, a Swiss Arms Black Special Carbine, it's called, also known as a SIG 551 SWAT. For me, in my world, this would be a non-restricted firearm. I would maybe like cutting off the flash suppressor and going at any length shorter than this, I might say would be a restricted rifle.
Why?
Because you're starting to get into concealability issues, right? Maybe. Okay. But this, or I was, and part of me was thinking about changing the status of as few guns as possible currently, right? So the actual benchmark I was using was actually my Tavor. Right. Our Tavors in Canada have a 20 or an 18.5-inch barrel with a flash suppressor.
Yep.
I have an AR-15 with an 11.5-inch barrel, so shorter than this by 3 inches. And my Tavor is shorter than that rifle.
In overall length.
In overall length.
Yeah.
So I would I would get rid of the barrel length.
Yeah,
and just go with an overall length restriction.
I think our whole concept of unrestricted, restricted, prohibited is it's so ridiculous.
I would get rid of prohibited, period.
Yeah, I'd get rid of the whole thing.
But
it's counterproductive at this point.
I would have, but basically all semi-automatic rifles would be legal, and if there was going to be any restriction, it would be based on overall length. Handguns in the Canadian context would remain restricted. But restricted wouldn't mean you couldn't shoot them on Crown land. It would just mean probably that we'd leave them registered. And only do that, not because I want to register pistols, but only because the Canadian public would probably demand it.
Maybe.
Just because of the legacy of it.
Yeah, but would that have any practical purpose?
Not really, because
Exactly.
I would still...
Yeah. So you're just doing it to make people feel better.
Just doing it to make people feel
You'd
better.
come right out and say, okay, look, guys, this is going to make anybody safer.
Hang on.
It's not going to help
If it gets
anyone.
stolen and it gets used in a crime and it's found, if it's registered, doesn't that help? Because it can get traced back to you?
No, not really.
No.
Because I have my own serial numbers. I have my own information. If that got stolen, I'd report
Yeah,
that
and
to the police.
You'd report it.
And also the law right now mandates
I mean,
you
if
to-
I wanted the thing back, right?
Okay.
I mean, I have to be able to prove, like, my car gets stolen, or my car gets stolen. The police find my car. I say, hey, man, I want my car back. I got to be able to prove to the police, yeah, that was my car.
Yeah.
Right. It's the same kind of thing.
And the law mandates that you
Yeah.
report any stolen firearms within 24 hours anyway.
Yeah.
So
But like
if you're law abiding,
If I wanted the firearm back, I got to be able to prove to the authorities that it's mine when they find it.
yeah.
Right. So
There's crimes of action, there's crimes of inaction, right? So,
sure.
Well,
but I don't.
But again,
I
we're talking in
I do
practical
not want to dilute the conversation.
Yeah,
So I think we're getting to
yeah,
good,
like we're
good
talking
points here.
about practical gun legislation.
So let me ask this question: is the main concern of the conversation the right to own a firearm, the individual right? Is it just purely a black and white? This is my right. You can't touch me, or is it about protection from tyranny?
That's a good question.
Sorry, say it again one more time.
Are we talking about the philosophical concept?
Like you're asking, like, what is the issue?
Yeah, because I feel that these are two undercurrents, and I'm not sure which one is more important than the other. Is it just the fundamental concept of the right to bear arms, or the right to own?
Own the property right aspect.
Or is it the concern of being able to fight back against tyranny?
Those two things are connected.
They are.
In
If
a way,
you
no.
had asked me before 2018, I would have said it's all about just, the individual liberty, property rights. I really wouldn't have put any emphasis at all on tyranny. But prior to prior to COVID.
But if you
I'm not so sure.
if you have the individual right, like having the one protects against the
That's
other.
true.
Right?
That's true.
So just saying, well, we just have guns to protect from tyranny, but that's the only reason to have them is because we're worried about tyrannical government. So it's insurance against tyrannical government. Well, the government or the founding document or national foundation that grants or acknowledges the right to self-defense and the right to possess a firearm or whatever means for that purpose is at a substantially reduced risk of becoming a tyrannical government.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
you have to remove the guns before you could start the tyranny.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, let me throw some quotes out to you. One from, since we're talking about the American founders who pioneered some of these concepts. Here's a quote from Thomas Jefferson. "The greatest danger to American freedom is a government that ignores the Constitution." So kick that one around.
Well, what's that one that Orwell has about the worker and the rifle?
Yes, I have that here. I have that actually. Just let me pull that one up. That rifle on the wall of the laborer's cottage or working class flat is the symbol of democracy. It is our job to see that it stays there. That's from Orwell.
See, I think so Orwell has kind of made that connection there, right? That the rifle
of the individual.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because he had some very strong things to say about what happened after those individuals rose up en masse. Right? He wasn't very happy with what happened in the Soviet Union.
Right.
No, he was not.
So, and that was kind of what he was talking about too. This the impact of that. So, here's a question. Following on what you guys said, I'm going to take this concept to the other extreme. Let's say you got a government that allows this Second Amendment, Canadian equivalent there, right? Is not a threat tyrannically.
Okay.
Right?
So it's like we have the government of Saint Laurent or Diefenbaker.
Sure. Interesting you throw Saint Laurent in there because he was liberal, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So there we go. That's what we got.
Yeah.
Right? Whole bunch of people have guns.
Yep. Which was absolutely true in the time of Diefenbaker.
Let's say a bunch of them get together.
Yeah.
And they form an organization. And they deem something that the government is, some policy of the government is tyrannical.
Yes.
And now they've got the weapons.
Yep.
And they can, quote unquote, defend themselves against this tyranny that this government has allowed to occur democratically because they've respected the rights of these individuals who have now banded together.
Okay.
Right?
No, are you saying like Freeman on the land or something like that, and some guys go out and
whatever. It's just a bunch of guys who
one of them named Rebo Ludwig, and they go set up a compound out in the trees. And
but just on a grand scale.
Your laws no longer apply to me.
Just a grand scale,
but a very big scale,
right?
Like the entire city of Prince Albert says, you know what, your laws don't apply to us anymore.
Or the 21st century equivalent of the Riel Rebellion.
Okay. Right? So we are talking about an actual honest to God insurrection.
Let's say there's an insurrection against tyranny.
Sure.
But the tyranny can be a very cloudy concept under these
depending on what side of the issue you're on.
So and I actually don't want to use the Riel Rebellion because that now we're getting to native rights and native history and we know that's a very cloudy issue.
Fraught territory.
So yeah.
Or say how about the Lower Canada rebellions with Papineau.
Okay.
What was that, 1837?
36,
37?
MacPat Brigade. I don't want to touch that one either, just because...
Yeah, I'm not bringing up the Mackenzie, I'm not bringing up the Mackenzie side of it, because I think they were different issues than the Papineau Rebellion.
Yeah, it might be. It actually might be more accurate to use Mackenzie, because Mackenzie was more... because it was Anglo against Anglo.
Yeah. And I believe the Upper Canada rebellions had a different cause, like a different set of grievances than the Lower Canada rebellions.
I think it doesn't really matter. It's just let's say
to your question here.
Let's say we've got the equivalent of Hitler and his brown shirts.
Okay.
Right in Canada, and they're armed.
Okay.
And they're just causing trouble all across the country.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Okay.
They've had their rights allowed all this time. What scope does the government have to come in now?
They're still committing crimes.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're talking...
uprising is an uprising.
An uprising is uprising.
Yep. The government
has
it's responsibility
it's against tyranny.
So? No one's saying that...
No one ever said the government didn't have a right to defend itself.
The government's not going to defend itself.
Yeah.
It's against tyranny, man.
So? Yeah, sure. But if I say, man, I'm against tyranny, I cannot be upset. Like, let's say I do that. I grab my guns and me and Weibo, we head out and we declare we're an independent republic and we're against tyranny. We're going to overthrow the government. I say, those dirty bastards in the RCMP came and kicked down my door when I was asleep and handcuffed me and put me in jail. Those dirty buggers. Well, no. If you rise up against the government, you better expect that the government's going to respond with the full force of the state.
The regime is always going to defend itself.
Yeah.
That's regardless of whether the regime is just or not. It's
That's
going
like
to
being
defend
the
itself.
Russians upset that the Ukrainians hit Belgorod. It's like, well, you invaded their country. You got to expect they're
Well,
going to
now we're going. Now, yeah. Like, I don't even want to go there because the statement said, "Oh my God, the Ukrainians hit something in Russia." I'm like,
Don't worry, we're going to get a COVID warning on this anyway.
Very interesting because the obvious subcurrent to the whole concept is that a tyrannical government is expected to be tyrannical, and that makes the government the bad guys.
Sure,
right?
Yeah, but it's still going to defend itself.
It's still going to defend itself.
Yeah, but under this scenario, I'm kind of going, well, and it's interesting.
So your argument is that the government is not actually tyrannical, but this fringe group thinks it's tyrannical.
Yes.
Okay. Well, they're still committing crimes. So the government, either way.
Well, no,
the government is going to act in its own self-preservation, one way or the other.
Freedom of speech. They feel that they're not committing a crime.
Well,
now
are
the government
in open rebellion,
or are they just saying mean things?
Or are they just saying mean things?
No, they're in open rebellion.
Okay, define open rebellion. In
So
other words,
they see a cop, they shoot a cop. They what's
No,
like?
they're just saying, "Welcome to the new Republic of Albertistan."
So sort of like, say, in Portland, where they set up, I think it was the Chaz?
That was in Seattle, but yeah.
Seattle, okay. So sort of like the Chaz.
I guess.
They set up the
I heard
autonomous
something
zone.
vague about this.
They say, this is our independent republic, and we rule it. The laws of Canada no longer apply. We do not recognize the authority, and we will resist with force any attempt to impose your laws upon us because you guys are tyrants and authoritarians.
So far, they have not really committed any crimes. They've declared something out loud that they believe to be true, and to deny them the reality of what they're saying is to infringe on their right to free speech.
If they're just standing on a street corner, that's correct. If they seize
they
department store,
they've created a border with
sure, yeah, they created a border.
barbed wire fence.
Okay, now they have seized property from other people.
It's all Crown land.
Okay, so now it's out in the bush. It's not in the city. It's out.
Sure.
Okay. They are still taking away, they're still seizing it from other people. And that, let's say I wanted to go camping on that Crown land.
Yeah.
And I go, hey guys, you blocked this road here. I was going to come and go camping. And they say, nope, no, you can't. This is our kind of our autonomous zone. At that point, yeah, they've kind of, they've broken the law at that point. They're now committing an act of, I'm not going to say violence because they haven't struck me or shot me or beat me or anything like that.
Yeah.
But they have certainly created an imposition upon me or any other citizen who wanted to go there.
I'm just trying to set
at
parameters.
That point,
I want to understand situationally the boundaries of these arguments.
At that point, right? the government would have to get involved at that point.
But are they, in your eyes, tyrannical at this point? The government. Because what I'm saying is, it is possible that a government could allow all the rights that you're asking for,
with regards to
firearms and free speech.
So you're kind of asking, how would we prevent those rights from being abused?
And
you wouldn't. In the same way that you can't prevent somebody from abusing their freedom of association. You can't prevent somebody from abusing their freedom of speech. You can't prevent somebody from abusing the franchise. But we as a society, well, not we as a society, because this is a matter of debate. Traditionally, we have felt that the risk of abuse of those rights was a worthwhile and manageable risk in comparison to the alternative of not having those rights. Because, someone might abuse them.
In the same way that the presumption of guilt, presumption of innocence is...
Yes. Like, for example...
fundamental. We're willing to accept...
Yes. Like, there's that phrase in jurisprudence, that it is better that a guilty individual should go free.
The 100 guilty individuals go free. Then
I didn't know what the exact number was.
Then one individual,
one innocent person be wrongfully convicted.
Yes.
Like, I'm not sure I would go with that exact ratio, but it's 100 to 1, that's a lot.
Well, part of the thing is when
the principle is the point.
And when they gave voice to that principle, there was also the thought that if those 100 people went free, they get theirs eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
right?
This is true.
They'll piss off the wrong guy in West Texas, and they'll just end up in a shallow ditch.
They're gonna commit a crime the very next day, and we're gonna pick them up anyway,
or something. Yeah.
But the point is that we felt it is better to preserve the rights of the innocent. And you know what? If it means that sometimes we don't get the conviction of the guilty guy when we know he's guilty, that's a price we're willing to pay.
Which to me brings us back really to one of the fundamental points that began this conversation, which is, the rights of responsible, law-abiding gun owners versus the societal response to horrific mass shootings, because that's fundamentally what we're down to, right?
I think it is for the people who want prohibition. That's what it's all about for them, for sure.
Yeah, and I think we've come full circle here, and I'll be so bold as to say, I don't think the government is aiming for tyranny at this point. I do believe it is a political move based on
expediency.
Well, expediency, but also because that expediency is based on widespread public opinion, right? That
I honestly, truly wish I could share that assessment. And prior to the election of Justin Trudeau, I probably would have. I know that say the Chrétien government, the Liberal Party of, say, Ignatieff, the Liberal Party of John Turner, all of these groups had gun control or had very strong stances and worked very, like a guy like Alan Rock, when he was Justice Minister, was an out-and-out prohibitionist. I don't think, at the time, I didn't think he had authoritarian ambitions. I honestly, truly, hand on heart, cannot say that about our current government.
I'm going to go so far as to say, and I'm not going to declare that this is the case, but I could see that they are doing this in good faith, thinking that this is a responsible thing to do.
I think they're acting in good faith in that they're true to their own ideals.
Yeah.
But I honestly, truly, to God, when I look at Justin Trudeau, when I look at the Liberal Democrat government, I look at them and I think that they see an armed citizenry as an obstacle to their long-term ambitions.
I don't think it's any more an obstacle to theirs than it is to the Tories.
I honestly don't look at the Tories and say, we need to control every aspect of the citizen's life. I do get that from the Liberal Democrats. I mean, this is just a fundamental difference between the left and the right.
What are Liberal Democrats?
The Liberal Party and the New Democratic Party working in tandem.
Yeah.
It takes less syllables to simply say Liberal Democrat.
Okay.
Let me give you another quote from an American fellow by the name of Jeff Snyder. He said, but to ban, neither did I before this. I believe he was, actually, no, I have no idea what his background was. But to ban guns because criminals use them is to tell the innocent and law-abiding that their rights and liberties depend not on their own conduct, but on the conduct of the guilty and the lawless, and that the law will permit them to have only such rights and liberties as the lawless will allow. For society does not control crime, ever, by forcing the law-abiding to accommodate themselves to the expected behavior of criminals. Society controls crime by forcing the criminals to accommodate themselves to the expected behavior of the law-abiding. That's to give context to the common motivation, which is a fear of the mass shooter.
Yep.
I just say, that's kind of a counterpoint. Although I believe,
absolutely. I mean, that's the point that our society has gotten to.
I believe that the current government doesn't, as I've stated, in episode 1, I don't think they care even in the slightest about mass shooters. Mass shooters, no, they don't care. They really don't care. What they want is a disarmed and compliant population. When I look at our current, when I look at, what's the name of that? He was a student with Justin Trudeau. He's not an elected official. He's a very close advisor.
His former chief of staff.
Yes. When I look at that guy,
I know.
I see a guy who wants East Germany. That's what he wants to put us back into. When I look at someone like a Sasha Trudeau, that's what they want. They want a totalitarian state where they can, tinfoil hat. And if I had said all of this stuff in 2017 or 2018 or 2016, everybody across the country would be saying, oh my God, you're nuts. In the looking back in hindsight with what happened to our society in response to COVID, is it really that unrealistic? It's not. It's not. For some
we understand that you're not there yet, but
for some of the weakest justifications.
Well, like I said last week,
we completely abrogated our civil rights. We threw them out the window.
If you're right, I'm going to be driving across town and I'm going to be begging an item for your collection and maybe a few rounds and admitting you're right.
And I might have to give you a shovel and a grid reference.
That might be what it is. Yeah, it's going to be.
Look it up.
Because we're going to find out who's paying attention in his lectures on partisan link-ups.
Yeah. Because one thing we just spent all that time on the trucker convoy, but we never really asked you. Did you think the Emergencies Act was the appropriate response to that? Like, because I think that's kind of what we're getting at is that we believe the Emergencies Act was not.
Yeah.
It was utterly inappropriate for that situation. So you can not support the truckers and still think that the Emergencies Act was overkill, right? But now, so the question is, do you?
I don't think there was any answer to that equation that wasn't going to be ugly.
That's a dodge.
Yeah.
It's a simple yes-no question, Trent. Simple yes-no. Was the Emergencies Act an appropriate response?
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Oh, wow.
No,
because
I do. No, you guys know the wordings of these things. So I'm going to do my due diligence before the next episode. You guys come back and ask me.
I need more coffee.
And I'm going to read up. I'm going to read the wording of the Emergencies Act and see if it applies or not.
You want to know?
Yeah, please.
I'm away from the mic, so you guys got to carry this.
Paddy's getting me a coffee, folks.
Yeah, so that's the question. Like, because the Emergencies Act, I can't remember. We could actually pull it up. Why don't we Google the Emergencies Act?
Do we need to?
Well, because you don't want to answer the question right now?
I guess. And I want to be careful not to go down any unnecessary rabbit holes and tangents at this point. Right?
Okay, let's be. Let's narrow it down.
I'm not saying it's not a valid question, right?
Was it appropriate to freeze the bank accounts of the people connected to the protest?
You're asking the wrong guy.
Why?
Because, like I said, fuck them.
Well, no, that makes you the right guy to ask. Why do you think that was an appropriate response?
I didn't. Appropriate response by me or
by the government? By the government.
By the government. I'm not saying I thought it was appropriate.
You just don't care about them.
I'm saying I don't care. I'm saying, you know what? They went there deliberately to fuck over their fellow citizens.
Okay, would that
and they got fucked over. My sympathy levels for them are boo fucking huge.
Future protests.
All future protests?
Sure.
No.
Should that be?
That
be a tool in the toolbox of government?
I'm going to go so far as to say it probably wasn't appropriate in this instance for the trucker convoy. But I'm also at the same time saying fuck them.
Do you think it would have been an appropriate response for, say, the Wet'suwet'en pipeline protests?
I'm not drawing a parallel
Why not?
because
They're both protests,
I
right?
don't believe the parallel is there.
It seems so many of our conversations, it's like I'm trying to pin you down to a specific, and you're always trying to dodge, I'm always trying to hold you to a given point, and you're like, no, I didn't know, and you're always kind of trying to escape, to escape the specific.
I'm not trying to dodge.
1, 2, 3, 4. I declare a rhetorical thumb war.
Yeah, it kind of feels like that sometimes.
This is going to take too much of our conversation. I will not acknowledge a direct correlation between those two.
All right, yeah.
It is a discussion for another time.
Yeah. Well, let me take you back to something else again, where we got distracted. If we can't use... What is the best way to protect civil rights, then? Again, if firearms are not an appropriate way to do that, what is the best way to vouchsafe civil rights for future generations?
I'm going to say the best way is the courts. The last resort is firearms.
Right. The courts are always
The first resort.
the first resort.
Yeah,
Yeah,
first
right?
resort for sure.
Because nobody wants a revolution.
I'm stating
Nobody
the
wants an
obvious.
insurrection.
Well, I'm
Nobody
sure-
wants the casualties.
No, hell no.
Oh,
right?
fuck.
Hell no.
Brother, I look at the last couple of years. I mean, yeah, I think some people do want these things. Things have gotten goofy. These have not been a reasonable pair of years.
We're getting into this place because we're dealing with a lot of things here. Excuse me while I search for words. My mouth always outruns my brain when we're doing this, but there's a reason that I originally wanted to call this podcast It's Complicated. Like, we're dealing with a lot of things, right? Like, we're dealing in a media ecosystem, and not necessarily legacy media, but even social media ecosystem that amplifies fringe voices.
Yeah.
Right?
Like me. I am clearly, I'm confident in saying that I am the total fringe voice.
No, you are not in this podcast. Sure.
Oh, totally. I'm way out of here.
Yeah, but you're still probably, you're not even one standard deviation of fringe.
Maybe.
Yeah. So when you say, there's people out there who want violence. Sure, there's people who want to watch the world burn. And there's people who want to go out and kill people, and they will just need a slight justification to do it, right? Something to cloak their avarice.
Yeah.
Or
What they really want is chaos.
Or their desire for chaos in something.
We've been seeing that. We've been seeing that since 2016.
But mind you,
it got
we've been
worse
seeing
in
that.
2020.
Yeah, I think a lot of the BLM protest was that.
Yeah.
That a lot of the violence, a lot of the orgy of looting and arson and mass destruction that came out of those protests were by bad actors who didn't care in the slightest about civil rights or judicial reform in the United States. They just wanted to loot and burn and destroy, and they piggybacked on that.
Topic for another time, brother.
Yeah, perhaps, yeah.
I'm not.
But these things all
Not right now.
Yeah, you want to take issue with it.
I'm not connecting those.
I think there was a lot of bad actors who piggybacked onto that.
Yeah. Again, I'll just make the simple statement that when it comes to disenfranchised, previously disenfranchised populations within a greater population, it gives different context to the pushback against injustice.
I guess I'm not prepared to argue against you at this stage.
That's why I hesitate to go down that road.
Yeah. Well, then let's say to go back to Oka.
Yeah.
To that episode, I would say that the vast majority of the warrior society who was manning the barricades, I would say I put them as the opposite. I believe they were not bad actors.
No, not at
They
all.
were. They knew exactly what they were there for, and they were there for a political cause.
Yeah.
There was no. I do not. When I look back on the historical record for that, I don't perceive any grandstanding. I don't perceive any opportunists.
No.
They were people who were committed, who believed in the righteousness of what they were doing in the political cause. And I really like that example because I find that a lot of the people who are in favor of gun prohibition tend to overlap very highly with people who are very pro-native rights and who are very earnest in their desire to use a phrase, truth and reconciliation, who want to redress the historical injustices to Native people. And so then I like to point out, well, if they didn't have firearms, we wouldn't be having reconciliation.
I think that's actually the most important element of that statement is going back in the past to Oka, as it opened the door to the progressive realization of all the issues that have come from that.
When you look at the background to Oka, almost every 10, 15 years, the Mohawk, or at least the Six Nations, either the Six Nations as a whole or the Mohawk in particular, almost every 10, 15 years had some kind of action before the courts, which was continually stymied. If it wasn't out and out denied, it was delayed. It was continually kicked down the road. It was obfuscated. It was delayed. They had no recourse from the legitimate, like what we talked about. Our first recourse is the courts.
Yeah.
They had been trying since 1761 through the courts and had got no satisfactory redress. And it was only when push came to shove, when that area was set to go under the blade of the bulldozer, that they finally said, okay, look, we can't wait anymore.
Yeah.
We can't, our backs are against the wall. They grabbed their Kalashnikovs and they vouchsafed their rights.
Yeah.
And if they hadn't been armed, if they hadn't forced the government to pay attention to them by the threat of violence, and it's not like they went out and just started gunning people down. They simply said, look, we're going to stop you from doing this. And if you try to use your monopoly of violence upon us, we will resist. And that's a huge difference. That is a huge difference.
It was probably a native group at the time was probably the only group that could have gotten away with that. And I'm not saying get away as in they've gotten away with something they shouldn't have.
That said,
they were the only ones who could have done that.
It was only a native group who ever would have been put in that position.
But they didn't. I mean, the language of got away with it, but they kind of did and they kind of didn't, because they called. I mean, it was the biggest, most militaristic response against the civilian population
or civilian authority
since 1970, anyways.
Well, but I mean, no, they haven't called the army out for on that scale for basically anything since.
There were two other standoffs. There were two other standoffs.
There was a couple, but it was always the cops. There was a couple times
where the army was called out. There was one in BC.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. There
was one.
But they only called them out just because they could bring bisons with. Just because they bring APCs
they wanted.
So all they called
AVGPs.
Yeah. So all they called out was the vehicles, the operators.
Wasn't there one in Ontario where what used to be an army base was then handed over to the First Nations? Was the army called out for that one, or was it just because it was a former army base? Maybe it was just because it was a former army base. I don't remember the incident also. Yeah, it was around that time period.
Anyways, what have we gotten to?
Where have we gotten to? Have we made it to fourth order?
That to me is what I really wanted to cover today. That I'm using the Oka standoff and the trucker protest in Ottawa as examples to show that firearms in the hands of the public, over and above self-defense, firearms in the hands of the citizen are really, when you boil it down, the only real way to protect civil rights. That when the sun is shining and everything's great and when there's no crisis, when there's no problem, when everything is easy, then it's easy to think that we don't need to vouchsafe our rights in that way. But when we are in a time of crisis, and that crisis for the Mohawk was being backed into the wall when the municipality was finally going to develop land. There was no time to wait for further court action. With the trucker protest in Ottawa, the crisis was the public health emergency of the COVID-19 pandemic. In those times of where the society, where the institutions of the country are under stress, under strain, these are not good times. These are not easy times. The sun is not shining. These were times of crisis. And when the rubber hits the road in the time of crisis, if you do not have the way to protect your rights, you're going to lose them.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not sure I agree with that 100%. I mean, post-war has been, in the developed world, the developed Western world, certainly in North America, U.S., Canada, and Western Europe, you know, I don't see a direct line between gun control, lack thereof, and individual freedoms.
What crises has Western Europe encountered since 1945? In the age of Pax Americana.
Well, what happened in '69 in France? It was like almost it was the end of the Fourth Republic, and now it's the Fifth, right? You know, they had riots, they had barricades, right? Nothing to do with weapons, nothing to do with the infringement of weapons, right?
Yeah, they've had riots, certainly. But have they had a national crisis? Has there been anything that has really stressed the fabric of Western European society?
And as it stands now, France has more I say liberal, but I mean like small L liberal, like more permissive firearms laws than Canada has right now. You can own one of these. Like English people go to France to shoot pistols.
That I didn't know. I thought France had very restrictive gun control laws.
No, you can own semi-automatic rifles. You can own handguns in France.
I
think they might limit the total numbers of your collection. But
European gun control laws are a very good example of how ineffective they are, given the Charlie Hebdo massacres and the terrorist acts which have taken place in Europe. In that, again, if evil people want
that I think
these weapons,
is a second that highlights a second order effect, I think, of gun control, which is gun cultures have used to security forces. So a civilian gun culture brings more effective shooters into basic training and brings more effective shooters into the security services.
Well, look at Israel.
Charlie Hebdo, like the Charlie Hebdo shooters were confronted by police in the streets before they entered the building. But carrying a pistol is optional for French police officers, and I think they were interrupted by like 3 cops, of only one of which had a pistol, and they all ended up dead.
Yeah,
right. So a civilian bred skill at arms is beneficial to the security services of a country because it just.
Actually, I just had to go through my mind. I was thinking about the whole of the island of Ireland and its 2 parts and everything it's been through since the late 60s. Because that certainly counts as a crisis. There certainly would have been gun control in place.
There absolutely was gun control in place.
A lot of it was circumvented. A lot of criminal acts to go with it.
The Irish Republican Army was never really unarmed.
So, but since the Good Friday Accords, you know, how do we, you know, how can we approach all that? I don't know.
Definitely there were incredible, egregious abuses of civil liberties in Ireland, North and South, from 1850 on to, say, the Good Friday Accords.
To me, coming out of the Good Friday
horrible
Accords,
and egregious abuses of civil rights.
well, absolutely, no question. Everything since the Good Friday Accord kind of, to me, emphasizes and answers the question. This is an example in Western Europe of how a society went through a crisis, came out of it the other end. There's still gun control in place, right? To me, it's not gun control, the lack of gun control, gun ownership, the lack of gun ownership that's at play. It's the society itself and the conditions it's going through.
I would say it was an example of a failure in that Ulster was a horrible place to live.
Yeah.
It was absolutely horrible. Again, there was the abrogation of civil rights. Ireland itself, prior to 1921, was, horribly oppressed.
Oh, there's no question. In fact,
It was
Ireland, what blows my mind is that we have,
Yeah.
when it comes to Quebec, I can't remember if I've expressed this here before. I looked at the Act of Quebec of 1774.
the Quebec Act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As being far more enlightened when it comes to
Yeah.
Britain's approach to a colonial
Yeah. A subjugated
colonial
people.
subject than Ireland is.
Oh, yeah,
Ireland
totally.
up to independence.
Oh, totally.
It's just night and day. So
Oh, yeah.
I look at I look at the French Canadians in Quebec and kind of go, okay, I get it, sort of, but
Yeah.
hey, you see these guys over here?
Yeah.
Like, holy shit! But coming out of Good Friday, what's changed now is this economic. There's an economic union, unofficial, between North and South.
Yeah.
And it's all because the economy of the Republic
Yeah.
improved as soon as they started emphasizing IT, and all of a sudden they became this
Celtic
go-to,
Tiger,
right? And the North has benefited from that,
Yeah.
and so it's still got that undercurrent.
Yeah. There's still
But
sectarian tension
the
there.
conversation has changed. As a result, to me, I see, again, it's got nothing to do with gun control or not gun control. It went through crisis. What it's got is a reason not to devolve back into violence right now because there's more important shit going on.
Well, I would say that to roll it back to pre-Irish Free State, that the Irish were subjugated and oppressed, and it's just as a function of they were, I guess in modern terms, they were part of England's sphere of influence. England felt they could not allow an independent nation that close in such proximity to them. And so they sought to control it and subjugate it. And the Irish suffered for that. Because the Irish were not able to defend themselves, they suffered for it. They were not allowed to speak their own language. They were not allowed to practice their own culture.
Well, it was all religious. That's all it came from.
More than that. I mean, religion helped. It absolutely helped. The fact that the Irish tended to be Catholic and that the English tended to be Protestant absolutely helped. But let's not forget that, like the St. Patrick's Cathedral is essentially an Anglican church. It's not a Catholic institution. Like, there were Protestants in Ireland. They were still oppressed nonetheless. They still did not have their own political self-determination. They were their inability to defend themselves led them to a position of servitude and a position of subjugation. I'll throw another quote from Thomas Jefferson. "Those who hammer their guns into plowshares will plow for those who do not." The Irish ended up plowing. And it was only through armed resistance that they finally, again, let's ask, would there be an Irish Free State were it not for the Easter Uprising in 1916? Would 1921 have happened if 1916 had not?
I don't know if 1916... it obviously didn't hurt, right?
It sure didn't. Had the Irish not tried
did it
constitutional means for the last 60 years, all throughout the 19th century?
Yeah.
To what avail?
But they'd also tried, that they'd had urban guerrilla groups, a.k.a. terrorists, depending on who you're talking to, operating
Johnny Moonlight
throughout that whole
whatnot.
time as well,
But
right?
yeah, but they were the Fenian movement was also largely. It could be dismissed by the English power structure as banditry. It was not organized. It was not comprehensive. It was not cohesive. Not in the way it was after, say, 1890.
I don't think I've actually ever considered that the Easter Uprising might have led directly to
the Irish Free State.
To the Irish Free State. I'll have to get back to you on that one too.
I would say that much like it bears the same relationship that Oka does to the reconciliation with Canada's First Nations today.
Interesting.
That had those people not been, like, they needed force of arms to assert their rights. Unless you have the force of arms behind you, you're relying on the goodwill of your opponent.
It's very interesting that ever since you raised Oka, you point this out, just the realization that how much came after that and will have been, it's like there's this parabolic curve, like slow burn, and then it's just steep.
Yeah.
Over the last few years, and we're still not done.
No.
Very interesting. You asked a question, and the question was, because you're on to Fourth Order.
Yeah.
Steve's standing there looking at me seriously, hands in pockets.
Just stretching his legs.
What was the actual question? We've gotten to that point, folks.
What if firearms is not the last bulwark, if firearms is not the ultimate protector of civil liberties, what is? If firearms isn't an option, what are you going to use when faced with a group of people who decide they do want to be authoritarians, who do decide they want to rule over you without respect to your wishes or ambitions?
I think it's a complex mishmash of liberal democracy and common sense.
So let's say for 1962 South Africa, if you are one of the Xhosa or Zulu or Ndebele people, how could those tools be useful to you of liberal democracy and societal discourse?
They're not, because you're disenfranchised.
Yeah. Kind of difficult, isn't it?
Or if
you're
an African American guy in Mississippi in 1962.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree. Now, you'll note that I said liberal democracy. Now, I mean that in its in a practical sense, in that it's
I'm on your page. No,
right?
I get you.
So you're
Again,
right.
And I'm saying you're relying on the goodwill of your oppressor. You're hoping that, I hope this authoritarian guy who's oppressing me, this Stalin, this Mao, I'm going to appeal to the, angels of his better nature.
Okay, so you're talking minority rights. I guess I was thinking more in terms of
political rights.
Just the public at large.
What if you're a Spaniard in 1951?
What, in Basque Country?
Anywhere in Spain. Maybe, no, prior to 51. Let's say 47. When the Falangist regime was at its most extreme. What are you going to do? You're relying on the goodwill of Franco to respect your individual autonomy. I'm sorry, but I just don't think that's a good strategy.
Well, there we're on the same page.
Without... And again, this is not a question I really ever thought I needed to face as a Canadian. I always thought, that's for extreme cases. That's not the reality where I live. Post-COVID, not post-Trudeau, but in the Trudeau era, I have to reassess that. I have zero faith in appealing to a fellow like Trudeau's better nature, that he is going to respect my right to dissent, or my dissent, that he's going to respect my civil liberties, that he's going to respect my saying, hey, you know what, I see where you're going with this, with your vision of society. I'd rather opt out. I have zero faith in his respecting that.
Interestingly, like my knee-jerk response to that is, well, I have zero faith in, an anti-masker.
Yeah, but that's the two are completely unrelated.
Reason. No, just to have
completely unrelated. No one is saying to you can't wear a mask. No one is saying that.
Here's what they're communicating to me. I have no interest in your well-being. I have no interest in respecting your well-being. I have no interest in respecting you if you wear a mask.
Yeah, but now you're projecting yourself. It's kind of like,
no. This is
you're
what
interpreting.
I hear them
You're interpreting your individual security and safety, kind of like a maritime exclusion zone that a country has over international waters. To kind of say, well, you know what? That's like China saying, I should control the Pacific all the way out to Hawaii, because anybody who's coming in there is not respecting my individual safety and my individual concerns. You're projecting onto other people.
Yep, maybe you're right. So this isn't a hill I'm going to die on right now. I thought it was an apt comparison, but you may be right. It's not.
Yeah, like my concern in this modern era that I find myself in is, what does protect my rights? Like I was deeply appalled. I was saddened, but I was genuinely surprised by how utterly meaningless the charter was. I would have thought that there would have at least been difficulty, that there would have been tremendous debate, that there would have been tremendous challenge. Even if you make a very, very comprehensive argument that say, look, we do need to lock down. We do need to impose movement controls, internal passports. We do need to abrogate freedom of association. We don't want people kind of spreading, say, bad information or inaccurate, or say just flat out falsehoods about, say, public health measures. We do need to take away these certain rights. And I'm not saying I subscribe to it, but I am saying that an argument can be made. I was genuinely surprised by how little resistance within the Canadian judicial and political establishment there was. Not in any province, not at the federal level, not at the municipal level. Everyone just rolled over, whether they were New Democrat government, Liberal provincial governments, conservative or at least nominally conservative governments. Everyone just rolled over. And there wasn't even debate. There wasn't even challenge outside of a very few lone voices in the media who, like, we can count on two hands with fingers left over, that said, hey, okay, whoa. Yeah, it's a public health emergency, but once you infringe upon these rights, it's a dangerous, dangerous slope. That debate wasn't there.
You know what? You know what I heard from none of those people that you're talking about, these lone voices in the media? I heard none of there's a public health emergency. I heard none of that from anyone.
How? Well, when I say that, first and foremost in my mind is Rex Murphy.
No, please, no.
You're Rex. Saying that he did not acknowledge that there was a public health emergency, but a balance needed to be struck? Are you saying that? Did you read any of his stuff?
I stopped reading and listening. Like I don't like Rex. Not anymore.
Wow.
I find he's...
He's not progressive?
I find he does not speak in good faith. The things he says are not in good faith.
Can you articulate on that?
Yeah.
He doesn't show respect for people who hold opposing views to him. I find his views very extreme, and they do not allow for the possibility, and this is the problem I see across the board on both sides. I see Rex as part of the problem. Whereas he does not allow for other people's reasoning, that they might have reasons. They may be valid, they may be not. And the truth is probably in the gray area, just as his, right? He seems to expect that people should listen to him, but he doesn't have to listen to anyone else. Which is why I juxtapose Jordan Peterson to Rex Murphy. I have tremendous respect for Jordan Peterson.
That's really interesting.
Well, the really interesting thing is Rex Murphy is the single most frequent guest on Jordan Peterson's podcast.
That's what I mean. Yeah, I find that
blew me away when you told me that.
Yeah, he's been on. Peterson's had him on, I think, 6 times in total.
And they have some fantastic discussions.
Yeah,
I'm actually going to go and listen to at least one of those, probably 2, just to hear them, because I do not see those 2 minds meshing well.
Really,
I see Jordan Peterson.
You are in for a treat.
Someone like Rex Murphy apart.
You are in for
But maybe Jordan Peterson chairs a conversation such that Rex Murphy has to actually behave himself.
It was more of just a dialogue, really.
yeah, no, they just have a conversation.
Yeah, and they were they're definitely on the same page.
Well, maybe if he's, like I said, with Rex, when he's on his own, he goes on his monologues. I got no time for him.
I'd love to pick your brain as to what you think of various commentators, but again, that's probably a different thing.
Anyways,
like to go back to the idea that, or to go back, to our premise, I find myself in a situation where I am very, very, very concerned for the stability, the safety of our civil liberties in Canada. I think they're very much coming into question now, and that there is a very, very large and active component on the left, which has always seen our rights as situational and negotiable. But they are very adamant and confident about it now in a way they were not pre-2019.
Well, no, a lot has happened on the quote-unquote woke side of things in the last few years, right? There have been a lot of movements, and in general, no, maybe not even in general. I mean, they're of quote-unquote good intent, but they've done more damage than good, I think, in a lot of ways. It's just the way the movements have gone. Oh, shit, I've lost myself. What was the end of your last statement?
That I feel that we're now in an environment where it is politically acceptable on the left to envision a world without civil liberties.
Well, I think, we have given up a lot of rights. And it was interesting when you were bringing up like a structured approach to firearms licensing based on time spent or and experience. And I was thinking, well, driving, I look at that. That's the way we do driver's licenses these days. And I really feel for the previous generation or the current generations because we didn't have to do that. 16, it was a rite of passage. You went and got your license.
Yep, kind of, yeah.
And nowadays, you get your learner's license, and then you wait 2 years. You're a learner. You're a probation.
Well, you could get your learner's license on the old system. It was 2 years because you get it at 14.
Well, only in Alberta. In BC, you get your learners at 16, and now you have that probation period, right?
Yeah.
And I just shake my head at the whole concept, right? But we've gotten used to giving up our rights. And I think there's this really nasty negative spiral that we're in right now. Every time I come up to an intersection when I'm driving and there's a no left turn on red, I just...
You mean no right turn on red?
No left turn on red.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you mean like on double turning lanes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, where it's a you can only turn during the flashing advance. And,
where unless you can only turn on to green arrow.
Yeah.
And then they immediately go to red. They don't allow a green, so they can enter the intersection one car at a time. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and the no right turn on reds.
No right turns on. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so, but those are both symptoms of the same thing, which is on the one hand we've become used to abrogating our rights and our responsibilities. It's both to the government because we've proven ourselves.
And all that stuff is offered up on the altar of public safety, right?
Right.
So,
and
it's to
wasn't
reduce
COVID?
One's to
Was it
reduce
COVID?
head-on accidents, and
Everything was sacrificed on the altar of public safety.
Hang on, let's keep COVID out of it for a second, please. I'm just talking about
no,
traffic,
but
right?
the no left turns on red is to prevent head-on accidents. The no right turns on red is to prevent pedestrian accidents. The graduated driving license thing is to prevent kids getting in car crashes and.
Right,
But
part of my
every
point is this.
infringement on our rights is always sold on the basis that it's good for us. That's in our interest.
But there's another element here, and I think the government is justified to a certain extent, because our society has over time proven ourselves incapable of living up to our responsibilities, and I see this all the time. Right?
Not sure if I go with you on that.
Oh, I see it. We need this can't turn left on right on reds.
Can't turn right on red?
No, can't turn left
Except for the advance.
Except for the advance, basically.
Yeah.
Right? Because things have changed.
Like what?
When I first got my license, this is the way how people drove, right? The person was out in the intersection waiting to turn left. When the light went yellow, oncoming traffic stopped because it was the social convention that the person waiting to turn left in the intersection got to turn. Right? Times have changed. It became person was still out there waiting to turn left. People oncoming, they saw the yellow, they're racing through. Right? This got so bad, and this is over the course of a decade I started noticing this change. 2-3 years ago, I was waiting to turn left off of 23rd Ave at 105th Street, I think it was. I was in the intersection, allowed to turn left, waiting, goes yellow. 1 car goes through, 2 car goes through, 3 car goes through. I think that's it. 4th car goes through. I was like, okay. I go to turn left. The light has long been red.
Yeah.
5th car nearly hits me going through. Right? And the teenage driver driving it is looking at me like I'm some sort of idiot. Right?
But is that a failure of our driver education system or a failure of civil society?
It's both.
I'd say it's just more of a failure of driver education.
No, I've railed about this. What do I say every episode? Right? We got this society that hasn't been disciplined, has been rewarded for showing up for everything. Right? Doesn't know what inconvenience is, let alone hardship.
But practical on the ground, getting granular on it, we need to improve driver training.
But they're being taught the laws, right?
Yeah, but maybe they're not being taught why the laws are there, or the practical application, or what happens when they drive with disregard.
Every day, people are changing lanes in intersections, although I guarantee you that they're being told not to. Every day, people are blocking intersections when traffic is backing up. Fucking over the people who are trying to turn
this
into
is
traffic,
one of those
right?
things that doesn't have univariate cause. It's like bad driver training. And I look at it, I see, well, cops don't enforce traffic laws that don't have speeding at the front of them. They
don't even enforce those. Speeding's been relegated to radar. I've seen people pull U-turns in front of cops.
Yeah.
Cops oncoming. Yeah. They're doing that. And the cops are just fuck it, drive on. And we know that because we've had members of the regiment who are cops who have mentioned this.
Yeah. They don't, the cops don't enforce bad or don't penalize bad driving, right? So, I mean, this is a not one cause thing. There's a whole bunch of things that brought this.
Exactly.
Right?
That's why I'm saying we've gotten to this point where society is behaving a certain way.
Well,
right?
So here's a question. If one of the things I look at, like especially as a horrible thing in our politics, is a lack of accountability. The prime minister has been flagged by the ethics commissioner 3-4 times in his tenure for serious violations of ethics of his office, and there's been essentially no accountability because the fines, whatever fines have been levied, have been small, especially given his financial status, right? So my question is, okay, so we don't have that accountability in government. Do we not have that accountability in society? And is the government just a reflection of our society as a whole?
I think we are less accountable. I think our overall societal shift in, say, the post-war era has been of one that discourages individual accountability and kind of encourages a more an amorphous, more faceless kind of society, in that our bureaucracy has gotten bigger as we have tasked government with doing more and more things. The role of government today is exponentially bigger than what it was, say, in 1891.
Yeah.
It's massive. And our bureaucracy has grown exponentially. I think the size of the public sector has gone up by over 400% since 1965 in Canada alone. It's something along those lines.
I have to take your word for it.
I believe it.
I believe it. I don't doubt it.
It's huge. It's completely like when you compare it to, say, the rate of population increase, inflation, blah, blah, blah. Like, the size of the bureaucracy has gotten huge. But the scope of government has gotten huge as well. Mm-hmm. There's a certain anonymity in that. There's no way you can have accountability in an organization that large. It's like if we have a fire, or let's say a small fire on a section out on, say, the Imperial Oil refinery, by Refinery Row. Mm-hmm. It's such a massive organization with so many, not a fire. That's something, let's say something a little bit different. Let's say a poor managerial practice, a poor HR policy. And we look at it and say, God, who the hell thought of this? And not just Imperial Oil, any huge multinational company. Right. It is so hard to nail down an individual cause. Like you were saying, it's kind of like bad driving. Mm-hmm. There are so many influences in this that, on the one hand, a movement, a shift away from individual responsibility is kind of baked into our cake. It's kind of an inevitability. But as a part of that, it has also been a deliberate, I would say, an artificial value imposed from top down. Like to what you talked about earlier, to say that the American approach has always been, freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, something like that.
Yeah, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And then Canada's peace, order, and good government. Yeah. Was it really? Or were we just told that over and over and over again from the people at the top? I would say that same kind of, top-down encouragement in shift away from individual responsibility to the, you see it in the literature and the comedy of 1970s television shows. With I blame society. Some ridiculous, action comes and says, I blame society. You can see it going way back 40, 50 years. This has been a long evolution in our civilization. And I do think it plays into firearms, because firearms is the ultimate expression of individual accountability. It is the ultimate expression of individual responsibility. And so I think it is only natural that an administrative state, which kind of doesn't really like individual accountability, would kind of want to get rid of firearms.
That's an interesting point. It's actually occurred to me that as we've discussed how we've kind of allowed our rights to be eroded, and it is happening around us.
Yeah, definitely.
And not so much necessarily the rights, but the responsibilities, right? And therefore that becomes the trade-off. As we give up the responsibilities, we're actually giving up some rights.
Exactly. Right, because the two go hand in hand, and I don't think I know you've mentioned responsibilities over and over and over again, and I don't know that we've dealt with it as well as we should have.
Talked a whole lot about it,
but because especially in the milieu of guns, because if you look, there's a lot on social media on YouTube. There's a lot, like when you're talking about carrying firearms for defense in the United States.
Yeah,
there's a large community that talks about the responsibilities of the responsibilities of competency. I would recommend people the Active Self-Protection channel, and specifically their other channel, the Active Self-Protection Extra channel. Mm-hmm. They talk about things like from 7 yards, needing to be able to draw from concealment and put a shot in the A zone of an IPSC target within 1.5 seconds. And that as a minimum competency level.
Yeah, that if you can't do that, you shouldn't be.
Leave the gun at home until you can.
Yeah.
That's,
yeah. You know, and there's
that's brilliant. I mean, that's what people need to understand is going on out there.
Yeah.
Right? And because that is critical to what we've discussed about, responsible, lawful gun ownership.
Yeah.
Versus
is the responsibility portion of it.
Yeah.
For sure.
Like if you're going to have the right to the franchise, well, then there's a responsibility that comes with that, and that's informing yourself as to the platforms of the candidates. That's informing yourself of the platforms of the parties. What do they stand for? What are their causes? What's important to them? We have that responsibility in the exercise of rights, and as you say, they go together. As we have sought to reduce our individual responsibility, rights then become kind of, I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm saying I understand how someone can draw the conclusion that rights can kind of seem superfluous in that environment.
Well, I think that they do because that's what's been happening.
Yeah.
I used to have the right, on my own recognizance, to turn left at an intersection.
Yeah.
I can no longer do so. At 2 a.m, at 137th Ave and St. Albert Trail, I have to wait to turn left, even though there's no traffic.
Yeah.
And the technology exists that should be able to say,
there's
no traffic,
like
so
this is the only
we should
guy
let this
here.
guy turn.
Let him go.
Right?
Yeah.
But we're not doing that as a city. Right?
Yeah.
I have to sit there, and as a law-abiding citizen, I have to sit and wait.
Well, especially if there's
45 seconds.
If there's a red light camera at that intersection.
Yeah, exactly.
But
right?
and that's so. Although there is room for, like again, that comes into the philosophy of Edmonton, City of Edmonton traffic planning.
Exactly. Oh, and show number 32 right there.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about the fact that the reason there's a problem with the LRT line on 111th Street is because one is the responsibility of Edmonton Transit, one is the responsibility of Edmonton Transportation. Yeah. Apparently, they never talk to each other.
Did you ever read that National Post? I think it was Colby Kosh who did a National Post article on that LRT line.
Oh, no.
The language was fantastic. Just the prose. Was it, he used the words gawk at the incompetence, marvel at the idiocy. Yeah, it was
like a 1950s movie.
Oh,
prologue,
even better,
right?
Almost like a 1890s Gazette or like a late 19th century journalism. Yeah, I remember he used the words gawk at the incompetence.
So like I said, that's another episode altogether.
Yeah,
but here's the flip side of this, I think, is although I think our society, Canadian society, is just self-eroding its responsibilities and therefore its rights. I would put forward that no matter what the government intends, no matter what the government wants, whether it's liberal or Tory, and let's just use the current government, I think of all the rights, gun rights, fundamentally, are not going to be completely taken away. Certainly not to an extent that the government's going to be able to be tyrannical at any point. For a couple of reasons. One is the hunters are always going to need their guns. Out in the bush, hunters are always going to need their guns.
You don't need to hunt.
That is an actual need. Those people out in the rural areas, there's no way. And plus, how are you going to police that, right? Secondly,
can't those people learn to bow hunt?
Even if you get the firearms out of the hands of the law-abiding citizens, you still got the criminal element. And good luck dealing with them.
Well,
right?
That's the crux of my argument, and there's whole thing of why it's all a bad faith, because the government is not not implementing any legislation to disarm criminals.
We know that.
They're just trying to disarm law-abiding citizens.
No, but if we're talking...
And that's why I say there's a hidden agenda.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about a tyranny, then eventually they have to go after the criminals with the guns.
I don't know.
Unless they employ the criminals with the guns.
Yeah.
Because that's not without precedent either.
Well, okay. All right. Well, then we're all screwed.
Mm-hmm. I
don't see Trudeau's government doing that.
Let me give you another quote from Matthew Continetti. There's no amount of evidence showing the inefficacy of gun control or the virtues of alternative policies will convince the new class to drop its crusade for regulation. That is not just because guns are safety hazards. It is because guns remind the new class that it has not succeeded in imposing the values of one part of the country and one segment of the population upon the rest. I do think that that is definitely part of what we're looking at here. They don't care about gun crime. They just don't
No, exactly.
care.
We've discussed that.
It's completely irrelevant.
It's not on the radar.
It's about it's about public disarmament. And they will, like, that is their end state.
But they dress it up in the language of public safety.
Well, they kind of have to. I mean, if they came right out and said, look, man, we want to take away your rights. We want to take away your ability to protect those rights because we have ambitions to further our own personal interests as a class that come at your expense. Mm-hmm. Are you on board? I'm pretty sure people are going to say no. So you always have to, you've always got to dress it up. Like William Pitt said in the House of Commons, like way back in 1783, necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants. It is the creed of slaves. I mean, this is not a new thing. You can't be honest with people and say, hey, man, I want to enslave you. Are you cool?
Okay, so this is where the Tin Hat Brigade comes to a head for me. All right. If it's at that point that's what's going on.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me if the government's liberal or not.
No, it doesn't.
All right.
It does not.
It's
a tyrant is a tyrant is a tyrant
to
is
me,
a tyrant.
it's more likely to happen under the Tories. Because what we're talking about is the interests of an elite.
Okay.
And that elite is not going to be an intellectual one. It's going to be an economic one. Either way, it could be the Liberal Party in Canada. It could be the Tories.
Could be
right?
either one. Could be left, could be right.
And
doesn't matter.
At that point, we got more important things than rights going on.
Like what?
It's going to be situational. It's
what could possibly be more important?
We're talking about a power struggle. We're talking about food riots. We're talking about a situation that is
the complete and total abrogation of all rights whatsoever.
Well, it's going to be the collapse of society unless someone exerts some control, and that control is going to be in the form of structuring the resources in such a way that the elite maintain their elite status and everyone else has just got a bare minimum to share.
Is that not kind of the story of human politics right from the beginning of civilizations?
Right. So so are we reaching end of days then?
No. To me, this is our brief period of democracy and representative government is a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of the human existence.
Yeah, Victor Davis Hanson calls it a holiday from history.
Yeah, I mean, all throughout...
Yeah, you brought that up before.
All throughout human history, politics has been the struggle of one elite, or the struggle between elites for power and dominance. And the vast majority of humanity just tried to survive as best they could.
Yeah, but it's
as
been
collateral damage.
It's been the throwing of ever more bones to the rest.
That only started with the Enlightenment. That only began with the Enlightenment and took seed in a very, very narrow geographical portion of the planet, and has been around with us, evolutionarily speaking, for the blink of an eye. And the default position of humanity is always back towards tyranny and authoritarianism.
Okay, hold that thought.
All right.
Well, that coffee has just passed right through me.
So, like, I will close by simply saying that to me, it's something that, this whole gun control, gun prohibition argument is more relevant now than it has ever been. In that if you do not have that ultimate bottom line guarantor of your civil liberties, you are depending upon the goodwill of, let's say, your worst case scenario political leader. Like, say, in your case, a Ralph Klein, a Stephen Harper, a Pierre Poilievre. You are depending upon their goodwill to protect your civil rights. And that's something we now really have to face.
Actually, I was going to say what this country needs is an alternative, because the Conservatives really need to step up and figure out how to pull themselves back to the center.
Every progressive says that.
Are you kidding me?
Boy, the Conservatives got to be less conservative. They should be more like us.
No, I mean, no, because there have been, in the past, there have been Tories I've voted for.
Red Tories? Joe Clark?
No, post him.
O'Toole?
Right? I would
Scheer?
take Harper back now.
Wow.
Well,
Yeah, but come on, man. Let's talk about clearing a low bar. Like, say you'd take Harper back now. Good God.
No,
I would take almost any prime minister in history back now.
Yeah, fair
Except
enough.
maybe, any prime minister not named Trudeau.
yeah.
I'd take Trudeau the Elder over his son.
The only prime minister in history who can even compare with the current in raw incompetence, malevolence, and unfitness for office is the other prime minister named Trudeau.
No, not even close.
This could be a long digression, but I don't. I think Trudeau the Elder was, and I can't stand the guy. Mm-hmm. I think his legacy is it's a legacy of ashes in a way. I mean, because he's ultimately responsible for the situation we're in now.
Well, in a biological sense.
Well, but in two ways, right? He's the author of our present the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and our present Constitution. He's the author.
True. Yes, that's
and
right.
he's the apparent father, though I'm still waiting for the DNA test of the current prime minister.
He's certainly the ideological father of.
But he was
the progressive movement of today.
Yeah, but he was.
No,
I would dare say
not
that
father,
that
but
Trudeau,
a huge influence.
That Trudeau the Elder's best
moment.
No, not his best moment, but kind of the best comparison.
Oh,
might be with Harper.
How so?
But the other side,
like a mirror image, like an opposite,
like a mirror image. Yeah, I think he was pretty hyper competent at getting his agenda through.
At doing evil things.
At doing evil. Yeah, sure.
Yes,
doing evil things.
He was a very, very competent evil person. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I refuse to allow the word evil into this conversation at this point.
Oh, it's there.
I do not call Harper evil. I do not.
No, because he wasn't. And it's not a word I use lightly.
Trudeau was not evil.
I would never use that word with Martin. I would never use that word with Chrétien. I would not use that word with Lévesque. I would not use that word with Drapeau. I would not use that word with Duplessis.
You would not use it.
You know, when you
say
that, you sound like you're reading a Dr. Seuss.
I was going to say.
That does, yes. I would use that word with both Trudeaus.
No, I don't use it for either of them. The younger is incompetent.
I know. I think he's malevolent.
Well, I think he's both malevolent and incompetent.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's not very good. He's not nearly as. I would say that Trudeau the Elder was malevolent but competent.
Yeah,
I would say the younger Trudeau is malevolent and incompetent.
Anyways,
like in other words,
you're right.
he's
This
not
is
as
a digression.
Good. Yeah, he's not as good as at.
Yeah.
For example, his father would have already there would already be cops kicking down doors and doing warrantless searches for firearms. If his father was running this,
no, he wouldn't have.
Was executing this legislation.
They would have been doing that as soon as C-68 passed, because that's when the power to go to do warrantless searches on came through.
One fundamental factor of this current government is they do struggle to implement even their own agenda. Mm-hmm. They have struggled with that. A lot of their key policy planks, they seem they struggle to get out of their own inertia. Yeah. Thank God.
All of their inertia is based on public opinion. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
No.
Everything about them is they feed public opinion. Public opinion feeds them. It's just it's a feedback.
I think
loop.
there was a lot of public opinion. For example, for electoral reform, there wouldn't have been a lot of opposition to doing that, but they ended up having to abandon it because
they realized it was in their best interest not to mess with it.
Either that, or I think my personal view is that they were only interested in electoral reform as a way to rig future elections to their own benefit. And when they saw that that probably wasn't going to be successful, they felt that the current system was more to their benefit.
Well, it is, and it's because of a point that I just raised. The Tories are fragmented right now, and give me an alternative, guys. Give me someone.
You have an alternative. You've got two alternatives. You've got the Greens, you've got the New Democrats. I would say it's conservative voters.
Throw away my vote.
I would say conservative voters are the ones who lacked an alternative until.
That's what I'm saying.
Right. Well,
but
what I mean is that
I would like
was a liberal.
I'd like to be able to vote for a Tory, and don't confuse a Tory
with a conservative.
Who's,
is that what you mean?
Okay, I don't know enough about O'Toole to say that he was a liberal. Or I might as well have been.
Well, he certainly was not an ideological conservative.
There have been times, well, I mean, it depends on what you call ideological conservative. Are you talking fiscal or are you talking social? That is the problem right now, right? There are plenty of people who would like to vote for social or
economic conservatism,
that don't want the radical goofiness that's going on, that's getting all the noise right now, right? That's why I'm saying give us an alternative.
I don't think you want an economic conservative.
Why not?
Because that would mean a dismantling of the administrative state.
Mm-hmm. Especially in this country.
Yeah, and an economic conservative wants small government. Mm-hmm. I believe that is antithetical to your values.
No, and I've said that before, right? And again, it doesn't matter because a Tory government gets in, it's only going to be in for 5 years. So there's only going to be so much they accomplish in that time, right? So if we're talking realistically, what we need is a changing of the guard to make the Liberals realize that they need to shape the hell up, right? The Tories can't pull that off right now, right? That's why I always said I didn't care who got in 2015 here. When did Notley get elected?
I believe 2016.
Was it 2016?
I believe it was 20.
Okay.
Am I wrong?
I think it was because it was off by a year. I think it was 2016, right?
No. Wasn't that the current government got in 2016?
I can't remember.
Oh, no, I got to be wrong. 2018 was when the...
provincials are 3 years, right?
No, 4. It should be 4. You know what? It was somewhere around 2016.
I cared less. Like, I support the New Democrats, and I was happy to see Rachel Notley get in, right? But I didn't care that it was her so much as it was not the Tories, because it was unhealthy for this province after 40 years.
Right, like a dynasty you were saying was unhealthy.
We just needed some sort of change, right? And that's what we need right now, because right now the Liberals have a lock, right?
Well, I mean, there are very, very, very few examples in Canadian history and almost no examples at the federal level of any party that has won 3 elections in a row.
I think there's nobody's won 4.
Yeah, I don't think, and no one has won 4.
Right, and they're coming up on number 4.
Yeah. And when I say 3 elections in a row, it's even rarer if we say has won 3 majorities in a row. It almost never happens.
They don't need majorities.
We tend towards dynastic politics at the provincial level across Canada, but rarely do we have dynasties at the federal level.
I think we're bucking the trend right now, and it's just like they used to say that there was.
I cannot see Trudeau.
You know what? There used to be a president. There was no president who was elected in a year ending in 0 that survived first.
Yeah,
term,
the 0
right?
cycle. Yes, I remember this. Yeah.
Until Reagan.
Yeah.
Right. So it's always something until it's nothing. Right. And I think we're going through that right now.
Do you think Trudeau is on solid, like the Trudeau Liberals, I guess? Do you think that they have solid re-election prospects?
They shouldn't, but they do. And I think it's because it's the Tories to lose. That's why I'm saying the Tories need to figure out a way. They need to get themselves enough to the center to provide a viable option. Right. And that's getting back to the point that you made about electoral reform. The Liberals have realized, I think right now, they are in a position where they don't need electoral reform. Electoral reform gives the Tories a way back in that currently they do not have.
I think electoral reform stands to benefit third parties like the Greens and the NDP.
Oh, absolutely
more
it
than
does. I mean,
anybody
that's the
else.
whole point.
Yeah, I think they
Right.
definitely stand to benefit.
But right now, it's well, it's the Liberals to lose, and it's up to the Tories to win it. They have to find a way.
If the electoral success for the Conservatives means coming to the middle, why didn't that work for the last two elections? I mean, they tried that with O'Toole. They tried that with Scheer.
Because
if that's the key to success, how come it didn't work twice now?
Because right now, we've talked about how fringy politics are.
Yeah.
Because it's all about the noise.
Yeah.
It's all about the social media, right? Woke is in the ascendance,
Yeah.
right, on the left. And fringe right is negative, right? So all those people who are in the middle, who used to vote liberal or conservative, depending,
Yeah.
right, depending on platform, depending on personality, because they used to be close enough that could make a difference, right? They're all looking at this. Well, woke politics are not dragging anyone down, but the fringe right is, right? That's why they need to come back to the center. They need to get those center votes.
So do you think, because
I just always find it interesting that commentators, like moderate left to radical left, their prescription is always the same. The Conservatives need to be less conservative.
yes,
I
it's always the same.
I'm not saying that from a left point of view.
You
I'm
never
saying
But
see
you're
that.
on a left point of view. How can you not say it from a left point of view?
But you never see that from the opposite side.
No.
You never ever see a conservative pundit say, I think the only way the NDP is ever going to displace the Liberals as the opposition to us in this political structure is by becoming more like us. The NDP should be less left and more center. And, they need to compromise on some of their key principles. And that's the only way they're ever going to be.
Actually, I would wager that conservatives
might
are
actually
saying
be
that.
that might actually be right for the NDP.
It is.
Yeah, but the
But
Liberals
not
have
necessarily.
the Liberals have they have stayed in power. The key to power the last 30 years has always been undercutting the NDP.
Yeah.
Whenever the NDP came up with a set of policies, the Liberals stole it. Show me one major policy plank of the Federal Liberal Party in the last 25 years that they thought of themselves.
No, I'm sure they've thought plenty of themselves. But
Give me one.
it's always included platforms that they've stolen from the NDP.
Oh,
You're right,
yeah,
because they have to, because if they don't,
They get outflanked.
then the left gets split and the Tories come in.
If perhaps we could back up two digressions. Take control.
Yeah, back to
Okay, yeah.
And put a bow on this one.
All right, then.
you have the
Fucking
floor.
get out of Steve. You're the one who let Paddy open the conversation when you turned on the mic again.
That's true.
Well, he was starting.
I did start on gun
He
control.
did start on gun
I did.
control, and how.
So anyways.
So what was the point you were trying to make there 2 digressions ago? Anyway,
Well, just that
the guns
are there's been my conclusion, my reluctant conclusion over the last 3 years, that guns aren't simply about self-defense. They are the ultimate guarantor of civil society. And I never would have said that prior to 2019. And I'm not happy about that conclusion either.
right.
But it's something that I just cannot escape.
I think that's something I've kind of always fundamentally believed, and I hate it when and you get leftist politicians saying, well, how are you supposed to use how you and your AR-15? How are you going to defend against the U.S. Army or nuclear weapons or whatever is like that? I'm like, well, ask the Taliban.
Yeah. And to be honest, that's not entirely necessary.
No,
It wasn't necessary for the Mohawk to completely overthrow the Canadian military to achieve their aims.
exactly.
It was not necessary for Cliven Bundy to completely overthrow the United States government to keep his cattle.
Exactly.
It's you don't need to win an entire war.
No, you just need to make it too expensive.
Yeah, and I always thought that some of these 2A advocates were a little kind of extreme. Say, like 10 years ago, I might have said that. Now I got to look at them and say, sorry, boys, I see where you're coming from.
You're just there ahead of me.
Yeah, they were there well ahead of me.
Do you have any closing thoughts?
What's today's date? 31st of July?
It is.
It is.
Well, 31st of July, 2032, we'll reconvene and if we can,
If we can.
and we'll compare notes.
Yeah.
In the meantime, happy birthday, George Jetson, born today.
Really?
Yeah, it's his birthday.
George Jetson
George
was said to be
Jetson,
born.
July 31st, 2022.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Wow. There we go.
All right.
I'll be honest. If I was ever in a position where we were picking like Hollywood call signs, I would pick Elroy.
It suits you.
That's what I always thought. Mm-hmm. Alrighty. Well, thanks everyone.
If you made it this far.
If you made it this far, this has been a long one. So please like, share, subscribe, tell your friends.
Or don't.
Well, no, do, but they can hate us or they can like us. They want.
Yeah, let them choose for themselves.
We're supposed to, exactly.
Bloody fascists.
Individual choice. But yeah, like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments or concerns, please email us at complicatedpod@gmail.com. And because I finally remembered to do this again, the second time in 6 podcasts, so I do it fully 30% of the time.
There you are.
So, all right. Thanks, everyone.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.